Everyone on American Airlines Flight 447 watched in horror as the little girl in seat 3A struggled to breathe, her father's panic filling the cabin while flight attendants stood helpless. The quiet black woman in 3B had been ignored all flight, passengers assuming she was just another coach upgrade. They had no idea that Dr. Grace Wellington was one of Philadelphia's most respected pediatric surgeons, or that her grandmother's simple honey remedy would perform a miracle. What happened next would shatter every assumption, prove that sometimes angels wear scrubs instead of wings, and that love often arrives in the most unexpected packages. Before we start, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue. Bennett Sterling stood before the massive windows of his penthouse apartment, watching the golden sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in brilliant amber hues. His reflection stared back, a man of 34 with sharp green eyes, dark brown hair slightly tousled from running his fingers through it, wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Despite his wealth and success as CEO of Sterling Industries, the lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and the weight of constant responsibility. "Daddy, are you ready? Our plane leaves in 2 hours." 8-year-old Autumn Sterling bounced into the living room, her auburn curls dancing around her shoulders. She wore a bright turquoise dress with white sneakers that lit up with every step, her backpack covered in colorful butterfly patches. Her enthusiasm was infectious, a stark contrast to her father's perpetual state of controlled tension. "Almost, sweetheart." Bennett turned from the window, his expression softening as it always did when he looked at his daughter. She was his anchor, the one bright light in a world that often felt suffocatingly dark. "Did you pack your inhaler? And the backup one?" Autumn rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair only an 8-year-old could muster. "Yes, Daddy. And the other backup one. And the emergency one. You made me check like 1,000,000 times." Bennett knelt down to her level, straightening the collar of her dress. "I just want to make sure you're safe, little butterfly. Los Angeles is a big trip for us." "I know, but Dr. Martinez said my asthma is way better now. I haven't had an attack in 3 months." Autumn's bright blue eyes sparkled with excitement. "Plus, you promised we'd go to Disneyland after your meeting." The guilt twisted in Bennett's chest like a familiar knife. Another trip, another promise to balance work with being the father Autumn deserved. Since losing his wife Charlotte during childbirth, every day felt like walking a tightrope between providing for his daughter and actually being present for her. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Car downstairs. Traffic to JFK is heavy. Time to go, butterfly." Bennett grabbed their luggage, his simple black carry-on and Autumn's bright pink suitcase covered in travel stickers from their previous trips. As they rode the elevator down, Autumn chatted excitedly about the plane ride, her voice echoing in the small space. Bennett listened with half his attention, the other half already racing ahead to tomorrow's board meeting with the California investors. Sterling Industries was on the verge of its biggest expansion yet, and failure wasn't an option. "What kind of father am I?" he wondered, watching Autumn's animated reflection in the polished elevator doors. "Even now, I'm thinking about work instead of her." Same evening, at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, pediatric surgery ward, Dr. Grace Wellington pulled off her surgical cap, revealing natural black hair that fell in loose waves to her shoulders. At 32, she possessed a quiet strength that commanded respect in operating rooms across the country. Her warm brown eyes showed compassion that had never hardened despite years of seeing children in pain. She wore bright coral scrubs that complemented her rich dark skin, a deliberate choice to bring color and warmth to sterile hospital corridors. "Beautiful work in there, Dr. Wellington." Dr. Rodriguez, the head of pediatric surgery, appeared beside her as she washed her hands. That little boy's family will never know how close they came to losing him. Grace managed a tired smile. That's the point, isn't it? They get to take their son home healthy. That's all that matters. But as Dr. Rodriguez walked away, Grace felt the familiar emptiness settle in her chest. Another successful surgery, another life saved, another night going home to an empty apartment. 6 months had passed since her divorce from Marcus, and the loneliness still caught her off guard at unexpected moments. Her phone buzzed with a reminder, Flight 447, to LAX, 9:15 p.m. departure. Grace glanced at her watch. She had just enough time to grab her things and catch a taxi to the airport. This trip to Los Angeles wasn't for work. It was personal. Her cousin Jasmine was getting married this weekend, and Grace had promised to be there despite her demanding schedule. In the locker room, she changed from her scrubs into comfortable travel clothes, a soft lavender sweater that brought out the golden undertones in her skin, dark jeans, and comfortable white sneakers. She pulled a cream-colored cardigan from her locker, remembering how her grandmother used to say, "Baby girl, always dress like you're going somewhere important, because you never know who you might meet along the way." If only Grandma Rose could see me now, Grace thought, slinging her medical bag over her shoulder alongside her weekend travel bag. Successful surgeon, but eating dinner alone most nights. The taxi ride to JFK gave her time to think. Perhaps too much time. Marcus's words still echoed in her memory. "You care more about other people's children than building a family with me." The accusation had been unfair, but it cut deep because part of her wondered if there was truth in it. Grace loved children, poured her heart into healing them, but at 32, she was still single and childless. Her career fulfilled her, but lately, she found herself wondering what it would be like to have someone waiting for her at home. Someone who understood the weight she carried every day. "Stop it, Grace," she told herself firmly. "You're going to LA for Jasmine's wedding. 3 days of family, laughter, and celebration. That's exactly what you need." Grace arrived at the gate to find the usual controlled chaos of evening departures. Families gathered around charging stations, business travelers typed furiously on laptops, and children ran between rows of seats while parents chased after them with varying degrees of patience. She found a quiet corner and pulled out her latest medical journal, but her attention kept drifting to the families around her. A mother was braiding her daughter's hair while her husband bought snacks. An elderly couple shared earbuds, listening to something that made them both smile. Maybe Marcus was right, she thought. Maybe I am missing something. Across the waiting area, Bennett Sterling sat with Autumn, who was coloring in a book featuring Disney princesses. He checked his phone every few minutes, responding to emails even during what was supposed to be family time. "Daddy, look. I made Belle's dress purple instead of yellow," Autumn announced, holding up her coloring book. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Bennett replied, glancing up briefly before returning to his phone. "Very creative." Autumn's smile dimmed slightly, but she continued coloring with determined cheerfulness. Grace watched the interaction with growing concern. She'd seen this pattern before, well-meaning parents so consumed by stress or work that they missed the small moments their children offered like precious gifts. "That little girl is trying so hard to connect with him," Grace observed. "And he has no idea how much she needs his full attention." Now boarding all passengers in first class and business class for Flight 447 to Los Angeles, the gate agent announced. Grace gathered her things, noting that the man with a young daughter was also heading toward the boarding line. The little girl skipped beside him, her light-up sneakers creating a cheerful pattern on the terminal floor. As they waited in line, Grace couldn't help but overhear Autumn's excited chatter. "Daddy, do you think we'll see mountains from the plane? And what if we see movie stars in LA? Oh, can we get those pretzels on the airplane? The crunchy ones." Bennett's responses were distracted, automatic. "Maybe, sweetheart. We'll see." "Sure." Grace felt a familiar tug in her chest, the same protective instinct that made her such an effective pediatric surgeon. This father clearly loved his daughter, but he was missing so much. The way Autumn's eyes lit up when she talked, the careful way she tried to include him in every thought and observation. Children need presence, not just provision, she thought, remembering her grandmother's wisdom about raising children. As they boarded the plane, Grace found herself hoping that the father and daughter would be seated far from her. She was already emotionally invested in their story, and she had learned over the years that caring too much about every family she encountered was a quick path to heartbreak. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. "Excuse me, I think that's our row," Bennett said politely as Grace stopped at seat 12A. She checked her boarding pass. 12B. Of course. "Oh, yes, sorry." Grace moved aside to let them pass, watching as Bennett helped Autumn into the window seat before taking the middle seat himself. That left Grace in the aisle seat, close enough to hear every word they exchanged. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Autumn pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass with excitement. "Look, Daddy. The lights look like diamonds." This time, Bennett did look. Grace saw his expression soften as he watched his daughter's wonder, and for a moment, the stress lines around his eyes disappeared. "They do look like diamonds, butterfly. Very expensive diamonds." Autumn giggled. "Everything's expensive to you, Daddy. Sometimes pretty things are just pretty because they make you happy, not because they cost money." The simple wisdom of a child hit both adults like a gentle slap. Grace saw Bennett pause, really hearing his daughter perhaps for the first time that evening. Grace felt a smile tug at her lips despite herself. "Smart little girl," she thought. "Smarter than most adults I know." As Flight 447 lifted off into the star-studded October sky, none of them could have imagined that within the next hour, their three lives would become forever intertwined in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, fate, and the extraordinary power of human connection. Grace settled back in her seat, planning to spend the flight reading. Bennett opened his laptop, intending to work on his presentation. Autumn watched the city lights fade below them, dreaming of adventures in California. But sometimes, the most important journeys happen not to our destinations, but to the depths of our own hearts, and this flight was about to take all three of them places they never expected to go. The flight had been smooth for the first hour and 20 minutes. Bennett had managed to review half his presentation while Autumn dozed against the window, her coloring book spread across the tray table. The soft hum of the engines and dim cabin lighting had lulled most passengers into a peaceful evening rhythm. Grace had been absorbed in a medical journal article about innovative pediatric cardiac procedures when she first heard it, a subtle change in the little girl's breathing pattern. Years of training had tuned her ears to recognize the slightest variations in respiratory distress, and something about the sound made her look up from her reading. Autumn was stirring restlessly in her seat, one small hand pressed against her chest. Her breathing had become shallow and rapid, barely audible above the engine noise but unmistakably labored to Grace's trained ear. "Daddy," Autumn whispered, her voice already taking on that thin, stretched quality Grace knew too well. "I don't feel good." Bennett looked up from his laptop, immediately alert. "What's wrong, Butterfly? Do you need some water?" "I can't." Autumn's words were cut short by a harsh, whistling wheeze that made Grace's blood run cold. I can't breathe right. Bennett's face went pale as understanding hit him like a physical blow. Where's your inhaler? Autumn, where's your inhaler? His hands shook as he frantically searched through Autumn's backpack, pulling out coloring books, snacks, and stuffed animals with growing desperation. Autumn's breathing grew more labored by the second, her small chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow movements that weren't bringing in enough air. It's in my suitcase, Autumn gasped between wheezes. The overhead. I forgot. Bennett shot to his feet so quickly he nearly hit his head on the overhead compartment. Other passengers were beginning to notice the commotion, turning in their seats with curious and concerned expressions. The overhead bin was 3 rows back, and every second felt like an eternity as Bennett fought with the latch. Grace watched Autumn's lips for any sign of cyanosis, the blue tinge that would indicate dangerous oxygen deprivation. Not yet, but they were running out of time fast. The child's eyes were wide with fear, and Grace could see panic setting in, which would only make the attack worse. Here. I found it. Bennett rushed back with the inhaler, his hands trembling as he tried to help Autumn position it correctly. Okay, sweetheart, just like Dr. Martinez showed you. Deep breath and press. But Autumn was too panicked now, her breathing too erratic to coordinate the inhaler properly. She tried twice, 3 times, but couldn't manage the controlled breath she needed to get the medication into her lungs. I can't, Daddy, I can't. Tears streamed down her face as her wheezing grew more violent. The sound cut through the cabin like a siren, causing nearby passengers to crane their necks and whisper anxiously. Bennett's composure shattered completely. This controlled, powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms worth billions was reduced to a terrified father watching his child struggle for breath. Help! Somebody help us! She can't breathe! The flight attendant arrived within seconds, her professional training kicking in immediately. Sir, I need you to try to stay calm. What's happening? Asthma attack, Bennett gasped, his own breathing becoming rapid with panic. She's having a severe asthma attack and the inhaler isn't working. She can't coordinate her breathing. Oh God, what if she... Sir, please try to remain calm. We have medical supplies on board. The flight attendant's voice was steady, but Grace could see the worry in her eyes. Standard airline medical kits weren't equipped for severe pediatric emergencies. Another flight attendant appeared, and Grace heard them quietly discussing options. Should we call ahead to Denver? How far are we from the nearest airport? 23 minutes to emergency landing in Denver, came the response. But look at her. I don't think she has 23 minutes. Grace had heard enough. Every instinct screamed at her to act, but years of medical training had also taught her to be cautious about stepping into situations without invitation. Still, as she watched Autumn's breathing become more desperate, professional obligation overrode social hesitation. Excuse me, Grace said firmly, standing up. I'm a pediatric surgeon. May I help? Bennett's head snapped toward her, hope and desperation warring in his green eyes. Yes. Please, anything. She can't breathe. Grace slipped into the aisle and knelt beside Autumn's seat, immediately assessing the situation with clinical precision. The child's respiratory rate was dangerously elevated, her accessory muscles were engaged, and there was the beginning of circumoral pallor, the pale blue tinge around her lips that indicated insufficient oxygenation. Hi, sweetheart, Grace said in the calm, gentle voice she used with all her young patients. My name is Dr. Grace. I'm going to help you feel better, okay? Autumn nodded weakly, her frightened eyes latching onto Grace's face like a lifeline. "The inhaler isn't working because you're breathing too fast," Grace explained, placing one warm hand on Autumn's shoulder. "We need to slow down your breathing first, then we can get the medicine where it needs to go." But even as she spoke, Grace could see that traditional breathing exercises wouldn't be enough. This attack was severe, possibly triggered by the altitude change, cabin pressure, or stress from travel. They needed something more immediate. Then, like a gift from her childhood, she heard her grandmother's voice. "Baby girl, when the breathing gets real bad and the medicine can't reach where it needs to go, sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones." Grace's hand went immediately to her purse, searching for something she always carried but had never used in a professional capacity. Her fingers found the small jar of raw, unprocessed honey she kept for her own occasional sore throats, a habit learned from Grandmother Rose's medicine cabinet. "I need a clean handkerchief or cloth," Grace said quickly to the flight attendants. "And I need everyone to give us some space and stay calm." One of the flight attendants produced a fresh napkin from the galley service. Grace opened her honey jar and spread a thin layer of the golden substance on the cloth, her movements quick but deliberate. "Autumn, honey, I need you to trust me," Grace said, holding the prepared cloth. "My grandmother taught me something when I was a little girl like you. Sometimes when our lungs are scared and tight, honey can help them remember how to relax." Bennett watched in fascination and terror as Grace gently placed the honey-soaked cloth near Autumn's nose and mouth, not covering her airways but close enough for her to inhale the therapeutic vapors. "Now breathe in slowly through your nose," Grace instructed, her voice hypnotically calm. "The honey will help your throat and lungs feel better. Just like when you have a sore throat and honey makes it feel smooth." The effect was almost immediate. The natural enzymes and anti-inflammatory properties of the raw honey, combined with its soothing vapors, began to ease the bronchial spasms that were preventing Autumn from breathing properly. More importantly, the sweet, familiar scent had a psychological calming effect that helped break the panic cycle. "That's it, sweetheart. In through your nose, out through your mouth. You're doing so well." Grace's hand rested gently on Autumn's back, feeling the tension slowly beginning to release from her small frame. Within 2 minutes, Autumn's wheezing had decreased noticeably. Her breathing, while still labored, was becoming deeper and more controlled. The terrible blue tinge was fading from her lips. "Now," Grace said softly, "let's try your inhaler again. This time, your lungs are relaxed enough to let the medicine in where it belongs." With Grace guiding her technique, Autumn was able to coordinate her breathing with the inhaler activation. 2 puffs of the bronchodilator medication, properly delivered this time, completed the rescue. The improvement was dramatic and immediate. Color returned to Autumn's cheeks. Her breathing settled into a normal rhythm. The terror in her eyes was replaced by wonder and gratitude. "I can breathe," she whispered, as if afraid speaking too loudly might break the spell. "It worked. I can breathe again." The cabin, which had fallen silent during the crisis, erupted in spontaneous applause. Passengers who had been holding their breath in sympathetic anxiety began to smile and wipe away tears of relief. Flight attendants exchanged looks of amazement and gratitude. Bennett stared at Grace with an expression of such profound relief and awe that it took her breath away. This powerful man, who probably hadn't felt helpless since childhood, had just watched a complete stranger save his daughter's life with nothing more than folk wisdom and gentle competence. "How did you?" he began, his voice thick with emotion. "My grandmother was a healer in rural Georgia," Grace explained, carefully disposing of the honey-soaked cloth. She believed that sometimes the oldest remedies work alongside the newest ones. The honey's anti-inflammatory properties helped calm the bronchial spasms enough for the inhaler to work properly. She turned back to Autumn, whose color was now completely normal. "How are you feeling now, sweetheart?" "Much better," Autumn said, her voice still slightly hoarse but strong. "Thank you, Dr. Grace. You saved me." The simple words hit Grace harder than any professional recognition she'd ever received. This wasn't about medical degrees or hospital politics or proving herself in a male-dominated field. This was about a frightened child who could now breathe freely, and a father who wouldn't have to live with unimaginable loss. "You're very welcome, honey," Grace said softly, settling back into her seat as the adrenaline began to fade. Bennett remained standing for a moment, looking down at both his daughter and the woman who had just changed everything. The corporate executive who was used to solving problems with money and influence had been rendered completely powerless, while this quiet stranger had stepped forward with nothing but knowledge, compassion, and her grandmother's wisdom. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know your name properly." "Dr. Grace Wellington," she replied, extending her hand. "And you don't need to thank me. Any parent would have done the same thing." But they both knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have had the knowledge, the confidence, or the willingness to act. Not everyone carried their grandmother's remedies in their purse just in case someone might need them. As Bennett finally sat back down, his hands still slightly shaking from the adrenaline, he found himself looking at Grace with new eyes. This woman had appeared in his life at the exact moment when all his wealth and power meant nothing, when only her skill and kindness could save what mattered most to him. Autumn had already curled up against her father's side, exhausted by the crisis but breathing easily. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily, "Dr. Grace is like an angel, isn't she?" Bennett's eyes met Grace's across the dim cabin, and something electric passed between them. Something that had nothing to do with medical emergencies and everything to do with two people recognizing something profound in each other. "Yes, Butterfly," he said softly, never breaking eye contact with Grace. "I think she might be." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She had saved many children's lives, but something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was the altitude, or the intimacy of the crisis, or the way this man was looking at her as if she had just handed him the moon. For the first time in months, Grace felt truly seen, not as a doctor, not as a professional, but as a woman whose heart was big enough to carry honey and hope wherever she went. But even as she settled back into her seat, trying to process what had just happened, Grace had no idea that the man beside her was one of the most powerful CEOs in America, or that this moment of human connection was about to complicate both their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. All she knew was that a little girl was safe, a father's worst fears had been averted, and something had shifted in the space between them that felt as fundamental and necessary as breathing itself. Outside the airplane windows, the lights of Denver appeared in the distance, but none of them were thinking about destinations anymore. They were suspended in a moment of pure human connection, 37,000 feet above the earth, where the only things that mattered were breath, heartbeat, and the miraculous way strangers could become angels in each other's lives. The remainder of the flight passed in a strange, charged silence. Autumn had fallen into the deep, peaceful sleep that often follows a medical crisis, her small body finally able to relax completely. Her head rested against Bennett's shoulder, her breathing steady and calm, a stark contrast to the terror of 30 minutes earlier. Bennett found himself stealing glances at Grace every few minutes, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't quite organize. The woman beside him had literally saved his daughter's life, yet he felt completely out of his depth about how to process what had happened. In boardrooms, he commanded respect through power and wealth. Here, at 37,000 feet, those tools meant nothing. Grace pretended to read her medical journal, but the words blurred together as her mind replayed the crisis. She was used to high-pressure medical situations, but something about the intimate setting and Bennett's raw vulnerability had affected her more deeply than any hospital emergency. The way he had looked at her afterward, as if she had performed a miracle instead of basic medical intervention, stirred something in her chest that felt dangerously close to hope. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Denver International Airport. We'll be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. Bennett shifted carefully, trying not to wake Autumn. "Dr. Wellington," he said quietly, his voice formal in a way that hadn't been there during the crisis. I need to find a way to properly thank you for what you did." Something in his tone made Grace look up from her journal. The warmth that had been in his eyes earlier was now guarded, controlled. She recognized the shift. She'd seen it in her ex-husband countless times. When emotions ran too high, when vulnerability felt too dangerous, retreat behind professional barriers. "You don't owe me anything, mister." She realized she still didn't know his last name. Blackwood. Bennett Blackwood. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, the gesture automatic and impersonal. "I'd like to arrange some kind of compensation for your help. Medical consultation fees, or perhaps a donation to your hospital." The business card felt cold between Grace's fingers. She glanced down at it and her breath caught slightly. The gold-embossed lettering read, "Bennett Blackwood, Chief Executive Officer, Blackwood Industries." Even someone who didn't follow business news recognized that name, one of the largest technology conglomerates in the country. Grace's expression cooled noticeably. Of course he was wealthy. Of course his first instinct was to throw money at the situation. Just like her ex-husband, who had tried to solve every emotional moment with expensive gifts and donations to her favorite charities. "That's really not necessary," she said, her voice becoming professionally distant as she handed the card back to him. "Any doctor would have done the same thing." Bennett frowned, sensing the shift in her demeanor but misunderstanding its cause. "Dr. Wellington, what you did was extraordinary. You used methods that saved my daughter's life when conventional medicine wasn't working. Surely that deserves..." "Deserves what?" Grace interrupted, her tone sharper than she intended. "Payment. A finder's fee for doing my job." "That's not what I meant," Bennett said, confused by her sudden coldness. "I just want to show my gratitude appropriately." "Appropriately," Grace repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. She'd heard variations of this conversation before. "Let me show my appreciation properly. You deserve compensation for your time. I'd like to make a substantial donation." Always money. Always the assumption that her value could be measured in dollars. Around them, other passengers were beginning to gather their belongings as the plane descended. Several had approached during the flight to congratulate Grace on her quick thinking, and she'd noticed how Bennett tensed each time, his protective instincts clearly activated by the attention. "Look," Grace said, closing her medical journal with a decisive snap, "I helped your daughter because she needed help. Period. I don't need your gratitude, your money, or your business connections." Bennett's jaw tightened. In his world, refusing compensation was often a negotiating tactic, a way to ask for more. He'd never encountered someone who seemed genuinely offended by the offer. "I'm not trying to insult you. I'm trying to do the right thing." "The right thing," Grace said, unable to keep the hurt from her voice, "would be to simply say thank you and mean it. Not everything can be fixed with a checkbook, Mr. Blackwood." The use of his formal name stung more than Bennett expected. During the crisis, when she'd been saving Autumn's life, there had been an intimacy between them, a connection he'd never felt with anyone except his late wife. Now she was treating him like any other wealthy client trying to buy his way out of emotional debt. "You don't know anything about me," Bennett said, his own defenses rising. "You're making assumptions about my motivations." "Am I?" Grace challenged, turning to face him fully. "Because in my experience, when powerful men want to show their gratitude appropriately, it usually means they're uncomfortable with the idea that they might actually owe someone something that can't be purchased." The words hit Bennett like a physical blow because they contained enough truth to sting. He was uncomfortable, not with owing her something, but with the intensity of what he felt toward her. The gratitude was so profound it scared him. The attraction that had sparked during her gentle care of Autumn terrified him even more. He'd learned to conduct all his relationships through the safe medium of wealth and power. Romantic relationships, business partnerships, even friendships, they all operated within the clear boundaries of what he could provide and what others needed from him. But Grace was refusing to let him establish those familiar parameters. "That's not..." Bennett started, then stopped. Because wasn't it, at least partially? Wasn't he trying to create distance with the offer of compensation? "I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to thank you." "You thanked me already," Grace said quietly. "Several times. And I heard you. But then you decided that wasn't enough, that you needed to add money to make it appropriate. What does that say about what you think my help was worth?" Autumn stirred against her father's shoulder, murmuring something in her sleep. Both adults immediately softened their voices, reminded of the little girl who had brought them together in the first place. "I don't want your money, Mr. Blackwood," Grace continued in a whisper. "I helped your daughter because she's a child who needed help. If you want to thank me, just let that be enough." But even as she said it, Grace knew her anger wasn't really about the money. It was about the walls she could see him building, the same walls her ex-husband had constructed every time their relationship threatened to become more real than convenient. She'd thought, for those few moments during the crisis, that she'd seen something genuine in Bennett's eyes. Now she wondered if she'd imagined it. Bennett watched her face, seeing hurt beneath the professional mask. He was making a mess of this, but he didn't know how to fix it without revealing how much her actions had affected him. How much she had affected him. "Dr. Wellington," he began again, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Grace. Just Grace." The formality was part of the problem, she realized. It was easier to maintain distance when they were hiding behind titles and last names. "Grace," Bennett repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her chest tight. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "At this. At being grateful without trying to control the situation. At accepting help without feeling like I need to balance the equation somehow." He looked down at his sleeping daughter, his voice becoming even quieter. "At letting people matter to me." The honesty in his admission caught Grace off guard. She could see the struggle in his face, a man who was used to being in command trying to navigate emotional territory where his usual tools were useless. "You don't need to control anything," she said gently. "And you don't need to balance any equations. Sometimes people just help each other because it's the right thing to do." "But you saved her life," Bennett said, the words thick with emotion he was trying to suppress. "You saved my daughter's life, and I don't know how to live with that debt." "It's not a debt," Grace insisted. "It's just humanity. It's what we're supposed to do for each other." Bennett looked at her then, really looked at her, and Grace felt that dangerous warmth spreading through her chest again. For a moment, the walls came down and she saw the frightened father again, the man who had been willing to do anything to help his child breathe. "In my world," Bennett said quietly, "everything has a price. Everything can be negotiated, purchased, or leveraged. I don't know how to operate in a world where someone gives you the most precious gift imaginable and asks for nothing in return." "Maybe," Grace said softly, "you don't need to know how to operate. Maybe you just need to learn how to live." The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and the spell between them was broken as passengers began standing and reaching for overhead compartments. Autumn woke up slowly, blinking in confusion at the bright cabin lights. "Are we in Los Angeles, Daddy?" she asked, her voice still slightly hoarse. "No, Butterfly. We had to stop in Denver because of the snow. We'll fly out tomorrow morning." Bennett's attention shifted immediately to his daughter, checking her breathing and color with the vigilant concern of a parent who had just lived through his worst nightmare. Grace began gathering her belongings, the intimacy of their conversation already feeling surreal as the normal bustle of deplaning began around them. She could feel Bennett watching her, but she didn't know what else to say. The crisis had created an artificial closeness between them, but now, in the harsh fluorescent light of the airplane cabin, reality was reasserting itself. They were strangers. He was a billionaire CEO, and she was a tired doctor who happened to carry honey in her purse. What had felt profound at 37,000 feet now seemed like the kind of connection that couldn't survive at ground level. "Dr. Grace." Autumn's voice was bright and cheerful, completely recovered from her earlier distress. "Are you coming with us to the hotel?" Grace's eyes met Bennett's over his daughter's head. She could see the question there, the hope he was trying to hide. But she could also see the fear, the uncertainty about how to bridge the gap between gratitude and genuine connection. "I think I'll make my own arrangements," Grace said carefully. "You two need to rest, and I have some calls to make." Bennett's face fell slightly, but he nodded. "Of course. The airline will take care of everyone's hotel accommodations." As they filed off the plane with the other passengers, Grace found herself walking behind Bennett and Autumn, watching the easy affection between father and daughter. Bennett carried Autumn's backpack along with his laptop case, his free hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Despite his wealth and power, he was clearly a devoted father first. At the gate, they were directed to a customer service desk where airline personnel were arranging overnight accommodations for all passengers. The snowstorm that had necessitated their landing was expected to clear by morning, but all connecting flights had been canceled for the evening. "All passengers will be accommodated at the Denver Airport Marriott," the gate agent announced. "Transportation will begin boarding in 15 minutes. Grace stood slightly apart from the crowd, checking her phone for messages. She had 3 missed calls from her ex-husband, probably about their divorce proceedings, and 2 from the hospital asking about her schedule for the following week. Normal life, waiting to reclaim her. "Grace." Bennett appeared beside her, Autumn's hand firmly clasped in his. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry. For earlier. You were right about the money. I was trying to put walls up because—" He paused, looking down at his daughter. "Because what happened up there scared me. Not just Autumn's attack. The whole thing. You scared me." Grace felt her heart skip. "I scared you. You made me feel things I haven't felt in 5 years," Bennett admitted quietly. "And I don't know what to do with that." Before Grace could respond, Autumn tugged on her father's hand. "Daddy, can Dr. Grace have dinner with us at the hotel? I want to show her how much better I'm breathing." Both adults looked down at the little girl, who was gazing up at them with the hopeful expression of a child who sensed something important happening between the grown-ups in her life. Grace felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. She could politely decline, maintain the distance that was probably wise, and return to her carefully controlled life. Or she could take a risk on the possibility that what she'd felt during those terrifying and beautiful moments on the airplane had been real. Grace began, then stopped as she caught Bennett's eye. He wasn't pushing, wasn't trying to convince her. He was simply waiting, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Just dinner," Grace heard herself saying. "I should probably monitor Autumn's breathing for a few more hours anyway." As her attending physician, Bennett's smile was radiant and relieved. "Just dinner," he agreed. As her attending physician. But they both knew it was already more than that. It had been more than that from the moment Grace had knelt beside Autumn's seat with honey and hope, determined to save a frightened child's life. Now they just had to figure out what to do with the connection that had been forged in crisis and was refusing to disappear in calmer air. As they walked toward the airport shuttle together, Bennett carrying both their bags despite Grace's protests, Autumn chattering happily between them, Grace realized that her carefully ordered life was about to become much more complicated. She was falling for a man whose world was completely foreign to her, a man who had billions of dollars and carried business cards but had been rendered helpless by his daughter's illness. A man who was learning, just as she was, that some of the most important things in life couldn't be controlled, purchased, or planned. Outside the airport windows, snow continued to fall over Denver, grounding planes and stranding travelers. But Grace no longer felt stranded. For the first time in months, she felt like she might be exactly where she was supposed to be. The shuttle ride to the hotel had been filled with Autumn's cheerful chatter about everything from the airplane's emergency oxygen masks to her excitement about seeing snow through the bus windows. Her resilience amazed Grace. Just 2 hours after struggling to breathe, the 8-year-old was bouncing in her seat, pointing out landmarks and asking Bennett a dozen questions about Denver. "Daddy, look how big those snowflakes are. They're like cotton balls falling from the sky." Autumn pressed her face against the cold window, her breath fogging the glass. Bennett smiled, but Grace noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting to his daughter's profile as if checking for any sign of respiratory distress. The father in him was still on high alert, probably would be for days. "They are pretty amazing, Butterfly," Bennett agreed, his hand automatically moving to rest on Autumn's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breathing. Grace found herself watching this gentle interaction with unexpected warmth. There was something deeply attractive about seeing a powerful man completely devoted to his child's well-being. Her ex-husband had always treated parenting like another business obligation, scheduled, efficient, but lacking the tender vigilance she was witnessing now. The Denver Airport Marriott rose before them through the swirling snow, its warm golden lights a welcome beacon against the storm. As they disembarked from the shuttle, Grace pulled her navy wool coat tighter against the October chill. The thin fabric of her emerald silk blouse, chosen that morning for Los Angeles weather, was no match for Colorado's early winter. "Dr. Grace, you're shivering," Autumn observed with the sharp eyes of a child. Before Grace could protest, Bennett was shrugging out of his charcoal cashmere coat. "Here," he said, draping it around her shoulders before she could object. "I run warm." The coat smelled like his cologne, something expensive and understated with notes of cedar and bergamot. It was still warm from his body heat, and Grace had to resist the urge to pull it closer around herself. The gesture was simple, protective, and far too intimate for two people who were supposedly just fellow passengers thrown together by circumstance. "Thank you," she murmured, acutely aware of how the coat engulfed her smaller frame. "But won't you be cold?" "I'll be fine," Bennett said, and indeed, even in just his navy wool sweater, he seemed unaffected by the temperature. His attention was already shifting to the logistics of their situation. "Let's get inside and see what the room situation looks like." The hotel lobby was controlled chaos. Dozens of stranded passengers clustered around the front desk, and Grace could hear fragments of frustrated conversations about room availability and rebooking flights. The Marriott staff, to their credit, were maintaining professional composure despite clearly being overwhelmed. "I should get in line," Grace said, starting toward the desk. "Absolutely not." Bennett's hand touched her elbow gently but firmly. "I'll handle this." Grace bristled slightly. "I can manage my own hotel arrangements, Mr. Blackwood." "Bennett," he corrected automatically. "And I'm sure you can. But I guarantee you I can get this resolved faster than standing in that line for an hour." Before Grace could argue further, Bennett was approaching the concierge desk instead of the main check-in. Grace watched, fascinated despite herself, as he spoke quietly to the well-dressed woman behind the marble counter. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the concierge's expression shift from politely helpful to immediately accommodating. "Daddy has magic powers with hotel people," Autumn confided, slipping her small hand into Grace's. "He says it's because he travels a lot for work, but I think it's because he's really nice to them." Grace squeezed the little girl's hand, touched by Autumn's faith in her father's inherent goodness. "He does seem to know what he's doing." "He takes care of everything," Autumn said matter-of-factly. "Daddy says that's his job, to make sure I'm safe and happy and that nothing bad ever happens to me." The simple statement hit Grace with unexpected force. What would it feel like, she wondered, to have someone whose primary concern was your well-being? Her ex-husband had been protective in a possessive way, but never with the tender vigilance she'd witnessed from Bennett. Bennett returned with key cards and a satisfied expression. "All set." The concierge arranged adjoining suites on the executive floor. He handed Grace a key card. "Your suite has a view of the mountains, and there's a connecting door if Autumn needs anything during the night." Grace stared at the key card. "Bennett, I can't accept a suite. Just a regular room is fine." "There were no regular rooms available," Bennett said smoothly. "The airline is covering accommodations, and this was what they had left." Grace was fairly certain that wasn't entirely true, but before she could argue, Autumn was tugging on both their hands. "Can we go see the rooms? And can we order room service? I'm hungry, and Daddy promised I could have hot chocolate before bed." "Of course, Butterfly." Bennett lifted his daughter easily, settling her on his hip despite her being nearly too big for such treatment. "Dr. Grace, would you like to join us for a late dinner?" The concierge recommended the room service menu. Grace hesitated. Accepting the coat had been one thing. Accepting a suite was pushing the boundaries of propriety. Having dinner in one of their rooms felt dangerously close to something that wasn't just gratitude between strangers. "Please, Dr. Grace?" Autumn asked, turning her wide brown eyes on Grace with devastating effect. "I want to tell you about my school and my best friend Katie and my goldfish named Sparkles." Looking into that sweet, earnest face, the face that had been blue with oxygen deprivation just hours earlier, Grace felt her carefully constructed walls crumble a little more. "All right," she said softly. "But just for a little while. You need your rest." The elevator ride to the executive floor was quiet except for Autumn's excited chatter about the buttons and the way their ears popped. Grace found herself standing closer to Bennett than strictly necessary in the small space, hyper-aware of his presence beside her. Without his coat, She could see the lean strength of his shoulders beneath his sweater, the way his dark hair was slightly mussed from the evening's events. The executive floor was a world apart from the chaos of the lobby. Thick carpeting muffled their footsteps, and soft lighting created an atmosphere of expensive tranquility. Bennett led them to 2 doors at the end of the hall. "Your suite," he said, stopping at the first door. "And we're right here." He indicated the door directly adjacent. Grace's suite was gorgeous. A sitting area with a sofa and desk, a bedroom with a king-sized bed, and a bathroom larger than her apartment's kitchen back in Philadelphia. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the snow-covered Rockies, their peaks barely visible through the storm. "This is beautiful," Grace said, genuinely awed. "But Bennett, this must cost." "Don't worry about the cost," Bennett said quietly. "Please. After what you did for Autumn tonight, this is literally the least I can do." Before Grace could protest further, Autumn had discovered the connecting door between the suites and was already unlocking it from her side. "Look, it's like a secret passage." Bennett's suite was a mirror image of Grace's, but with evidence of hasty packing scattered around. His laptop bag on the desk, Autumn's bright purple backpack spilling crayons and coloring books onto the sofa. "Daddy, can we order food now? My tummy is making noise." Bennett smiled, pulling out his phone. "What sounds good? They have chicken strips, mac and cheese, pizza." "Can Dr. Grace choose? She saved my life, so she should pick dinner." Grace felt her throat tighten at the casual way Autumn referenced what had happened on the plane. To the little girl, it was already just another adventure. She had no idea how close she'd come to a medical emergency that could have had serious consequences. "How about we all choose together?" Grace suggested. "What's your favorite food, Autumn?" "Grilled cheese and tomato soup. But Daddy says room service grilled cheese is never as good as Mrs. Patterson makes." "Who's Mrs. Patterson?" Grace asked, settling onto the sofa beside Autumn while Bennett perused the room service menu. "She's our housekeeper, but she's more like family," Autumn explained, snuggling against Grace's side with the easy affection of a child who had decided she liked someone. "She's been taking care of Daddy since he was little like me. She makes the best cookies in the whole world and tells me stories about when Daddy was young and got in trouble for climbing trees." Grace glanced at Bennett, who was pretending to study the menu while obviously listening to his daughter's chatter. "Your dad climbed trees when he was little?" "He climbed everything," Autumn said conspiratorially. "Mrs. Patterson says he gave his mommy gray hair before he was 10. But then he grew up and became very important with computers and buildings and stuff." "Buildings?" Grace asked. "Blackwood Industries develops mixed-use properties," Bennett said without looking up from the menu. "Residential and commercial real estate. Some tech ventures. It's not very interesting." Grace suspected that was a significant understatement, but she appreciated that he wasn't trying to impress her with his business empire. "I think grilled cheese sounds perfect," Grace said. "And maybe some of that tomato soup too. Winter weather calls for comfort food." Bennett's smile was warm and grateful. "Grilled cheese it is. And hot chocolate for the patient." While Bennett called in their order, Grace found herself drawn into Autumn's enthusiastic description of her third-grade class, her goldfish's elaborate tank setup, and her plans for Halloween the following week. "I'm going to be a doctor," Autumn announced proudly. "Like Dr. Grace. I want to help people feel better when they're sick." Grace's heart squeezed. "That's a wonderful thing to want to do." "Daddy says doctors are heroes," Autumn continued, completely unaware of the way both adults' eyes met over her head. He says they save people's lives and make families happy again. Your daddy is very wise, Grace said softly, her gaze lingering on Bennett's face. There was something in his expression, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. As if his daughter's innocent words had revealed something he'd been trying to keep hidden. The room service arrived with remarkable speed, another benefit, Grace suspected, of Bennett's concierge magic. The hotel staff set up their dinner on the suite's dining table with white linens and real china, transforming a simple meal into something special. As they ate, Grace found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. Autumn kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking Grace about her work, her apartment, whether she had any pets. Bennett was quieter, but Grace could feel his attention on her, the way he seemed to hang on her every word. Do you like being a doctor? Autumn asked around a bite of grilled cheese. I love it, Grace said honestly. I've wanted to be a doctor since I was about your age. I like helping children feel better when they're scared or hurting. Were you scared when I couldn't breathe on the airplane? The direct question caught Grace off guard. She glanced at Bennett, who had gone very still, waiting for her answer. A little, Grace admitted. But I was more focused on helping you feel better. When someone needs help, you don't really have time to be scared. You just do what needs to be done. Daddy was really scared, Autumn said matter-of-factly. He gets scared whenever I get sick because he doesn't want me to go to heaven like Mommy did. The innocent statement hit the table like a bomb. Bennett's face went pale, and Grace felt her heart break a little for both father and daughter. The weight of Bennett's fear, his desperate need to protect the only family he had left, suddenly made perfect sense. Autumn, Bennett said quietly, we don't need to talk about that right now. It's okay, Daddy, Autumn said, reaching over to pat his hand with 8-year-old wisdom. Dr. Grace understands. She's a doctor. She knows about people going to heaven when they're too sick. Grace met Bennett's eyes across the table, seeing the raw pain he was trying to hide from his daughter. She understood now why her offer to help had affected him so profoundly. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the relief of a man who lived every day with the terror of losing the most important person in his world. Your daddy loves you very much, Grace said gently to Autumn. And he's going to make sure you're safe and healthy for a very long time. I know, Autumn said simply. That's what daddies do. They keep their little girls safe. The conversation moved to lighter topics after that, but Grace was hyper-aware of the new understanding between her and Bennett. She could see the gratitude in his eyes, but also something deeper, a recognition that she understood the weight he carried, the constant vigilance required to protect someone so precious. As Autumn's energy began to flag, Bennett suggested it was time for bed. You've had a big day, Butterfly, and we have an early flight tomorrow. Can Dr. Grace tuck me in? Autumn asked hopefully. Please. I want to show her my special stuffed elephant. Bennett looked at Grace questioningly, and she nodded. I'd love to meet your elephant. Autumn's bedtime routine was clearly well established. Bennett helped her brush her teeth and change into pajamas covered with cartoon unicorns, while Grace waited in the sitting area. The domesticity of it all, the gentle way Bennett braided his daughter's hair, the patient answers to her endless questions about tomorrow's flight, painted a picture of a man who had learned to be both father and mother to his child. When Autumn was finally settled in bed with her stuffed elephant, she looked up at Grace with sleepy eyes. Thank you for helping me breathe, Dr. Grace. And thank you for having dinner with us. I hope I see you again sometime. Grace leaned down to kiss the little girl's forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of children's shampoo and innocence. Sweet dreams, Autumn. Remember to use your inhaler if you feel any tightness in your chest, okay? I will. Daddy worries, but I'm really okay now. You fixed me. If only it were that simple, Grace thought. If only love and medicine could fix everything that was broken in the world. Bennett walked Grace to the connecting door between their suites, both of them moving quietly to avoid waking Autumn. In the doorway, they stood facing each other, the events of the evening settling between them like snow accumulating on a windowsill. "Thank you," Bennett said quietly. "For dinner, for being so wonderful with Autumn, for everything." "She's an amazing little girl," Grace replied. "You've done a beautiful job raising her." "I'm terrified every day that I'm not enough," Bennett admitted, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "That I'll fail her the way I failed her mother." Grace's hand moved instinctively to touch his arm. "Bennett, you didn't fail anyone. And you're more than enough. Autumn adores you. Anyone can see how loved and secure she feels." "Her mother died because I wasn't there," Bennett said, his voice thick with old guilt. "I was in a meeting in Tokyo when Rebecca went into labor. By the time I got back to New York, there were complications. If I had been there, if I had insisted she go to the hospital sooner—" "Stop," Grace said firmly. "Medical complications happen. They're not anyone's fault, especially not yours. You can't control everything, Bennett, no matter how much you want to." "I know that logically," Bennett said. "But when I saw Autumn struggling to breathe tonight, when I realized there was nothing I could do to help her, it brought back every fear I've lived with for the past 5 years." Grace studied his face in the soft hallway lighting. This vulnerable, haunted man was so different from the controlled CEO who had tried to offer her money earlier. This was the real Bennett, a father carrying the weight of loss and the terror of loving someone so completely that losing them would destroy him. "You did help her," Grace said softly. "You stayed calm, you kept her feeling safe, and you trusted me to do my job. That took tremendous courage." "It didn't feel courageous. It felt like drowning. But you didn't drown. You held on, and you let someone help you. That's actually the bravest thing of all." They stood there for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken understanding. Grace was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how easy it would be to step closer, to offer comfort in a way that would cross every professional boundary she'd ever maintained. Instead, she stepped back slightly, creating space that felt both necessary and disappointing. "I should let you get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow will be another long day of travel." "Grace," Bennett said as she started to turn away, "what you said earlier, about learning how to live instead of just operate. I haven't thought about that in a long time. About living instead of just surviving and protecting." "Maybe," Grace said carefully, "that's something worth exploring." "Maybe it is," Bennett agreed, his eyes never leaving her face. "Good night, Grace." "Good night, Bennett." Grace closed the connecting door softly and leaned against it, her heart racing. In the space of a few hours, her carefully ordered life had been completely upended. She was attracted to a man whose world was utterly foreign to her, a man who came with complicated baggage, and a daughter who had already claimed a piece of her heart. The smart thing would be to maintain distance, to get on tomorrow's flight, sit in a different row, and return to her real life in Philadelphia. To treat this as what it was supposed to be, a brief intersection of strangers brought together by crisis. But as Grace changed into the complimentary hotel pajamas and settled into the luxurious bed, she found herself hoping that tomorrow's flight would be delayed just a little longer. Because for the first time in months, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged, just on the other side of a connecting door from a man and his daughter who had reminded her that some connections couldn't be planned or controlled. Outside her window, snow continued to fall over Denver, blanketing the city in pristine white. And in the suite next door, she could hear the soft murmur of Bennett's voice as he checked on his sleeping daughter one more time before settling in for the night. Grace fell asleep with a smile on her face, Bennett's coat still carrying his scent draped over the chair beside her bed, and the taste of possibility sweet on her lips. Grace woke to the sound of soft laughter filtering through the connecting door. For a moment, she forgot where she was, her apartment in Philadelphia seeming like a distant memory. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. The flight, Autumn's attack, Bennett's grateful eyes, and the way her heart had stuttered when he draped his coat around her shoulders. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing that the snowstorm had passed, leaving Denver transformed into a winter wonderland. The mountains stood majestic against a brilliant blue sky, their peaks crowned with fresh powder that caught the early sunlight like diamonds. Another peal of giggles from next door made Grace smile despite herself. She could hear Autumn's voice, bright and animated, followed by Bennett's deeper tones. The easy affection between them was evident even through the walls, and Grace found herself curious about their morning routine. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague Dr. Martinez. "Flight updates? Hope you made it to LA safely. Emergency surgery went well. Patient asking for you specifically." Grace stared at the message, reality crashing back. She had a life in Philadelphia, patients who needed her, responsibilities that didn't include getting emotionally entangled with a billionaire CEO and his adorable daughter. She typed back quickly, "Delayed in Denver due to storm. Will update when I have new flight info." A soft knock on the connecting door interrupted her thoughts. "Dr. Grace? Are you awake?" Autumn's voice was barely above a whisper. Grace quickly pulled on the hotel robe and opened the door to find Autumn standing there in bright pink leggings and a sunshine yellow sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that Bennett had clearly attempted with varying degrees of success. "Good morning, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Really good. I used my inhaler when I woke up like you said, and my breathing feels perfect." Autumn beamed up at her. "Daddy's ordering breakfast, and he said I could ask if you want to eat with us. He's being all weird and nervous about it, though." Grace couldn't help but smile at Autumn's brutal honesty. "Weird and nervous how?" "He keeps fixing his hair and checking his phone and asking me if his sweater looks okay," Autumn reported with 8-year-old matter-of-factness. "Mrs. Patterson says men get like that when they like a lady." Heat crept up Grace's neck. "Autumn, I don't think." "It's okay," Autumn said quickly. "I like you too. You smell like flowers and you have kind eyes, and you saved my life. Plus, you listen to me when I talk, not like some grown-ups who just pretend to listen." The simple statement hit Grace harder than she expected. When was the last time someone had described her as having kind eyes? Her ex-husband used to call her intense and too serious. But this little girl saw kindness in her, and somehow that mattered more than any professional accolade. "Give me 5 minutes to get dressed, and I'll join you for breakfast," Grace said. Autumn's face lit up. "Really? Daddy's going to be so happy." "He was asking Mrs. Patterson on the phone earlier if he should invite you, and she told him to stop being a scaredy cat." Grace laughed despite herself. "Mrs. Patterson sounds like a wise woman." "She is. She says I should trust my instincts about people, and my instincts say you're good for Daddy." Before Grace could respond to that loaded statement, Autumn had skipped back to her suite, leaving Grace to process the implications of an 8-year-old's matchmaking instincts. Grace dressed quickly in her spare clothes. dark jeans, and a soft lavender cashmere sweater that brought out the green in her eyes. She'd packed light for what was supposed to be a quick trip to Los Angeles, never expecting to be stranded in Denver with the most intriguing man she'd met in years. When she knocked on Bennett's door, he opened it immediately, as if he'd been waiting nearby. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a forest green pullover that made his brown eyes look almost amber in the morning light. His hair was indeed perfectly arranged, though Grace could see the effort behind the casual style. "Good morning," he said, and there was something almost shy in his expression that made Grace's pulse quicken. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a baby," Grace said, then immediately regretted the phrase given Autumn's presence. "I mean very well. Thank you." "The mountains are incredible this morning," Bennett said, gesturing toward the windows. "I've been to Denver dozens of times for business, but I don't think I've ever really seen it before." Grace knew exactly what he meant. How often did any of them really see the beauty around them when they were rushing from one obligation to the next? "Dr. Grace, look what Daddy ordered." Autumn called from the dining table, which had been set up with white linens and an impressive breakfast spread. Pancakes with blueberries and whipped cream, and bacon, and fresh fruit, and orange juice that's not from a box. The table could have fed 6 people, but Grace was learning that Bennett didn't do anything halfway. There were also Belgian waffles, scrambled eggs, breakfast potatoes, and what appeared to be fresh-baked pastries. "This looks amazing," Grace said, settling into the chair Bennett held out for her. "Though I think you've ordered enough food for the entire hotel." "I wasn't sure what you liked," Bennett said, and there was that shy uncertainty again. "Autumn insisted on the pancakes, and I thought you might prefer something lighter, but then I realized I don't actually know anything about your preferences." "Bennett," Grace said gently, touched by his nervousness. "It's perfect. Thank you." As they ate, Autumn kept up her usual cheerful chatter, but Grace noticed Bennett watching her carefully, as if trying to memorize every expression, every gesture. It was flattering and slightly overwhelming to be the focus of such intense attention. "Daddy, tell Dr. Grace about when you were little and you got stuck in the tree," Autumn suggested, spreading whipped cream on her pancakes with artistic enthusiasm. "Autumn, I don't think Dr. Grace needs to hear about my childhood disasters," Bennett said, but he was smiling. "Actually, I'd love to hear about them," Grace said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "I have a hard time picturing you as anything other than completely in control." Bennett's laugh was rueful. "Trust me, control is something I learned, not something I was born with. I was actually a pretty wild kid." "Really wild," Autumn confirmed solemnly. "Mrs. Patterson says you gave your parents gray hair." "Mrs. Patterson exaggerates," Bennett said, but his expression had grown thoughtful. "Though I suppose I was restless. My parents worked a lot, traveled constantly for their business. I spent most of my childhood with various nannies and housekeepers, and I think I acted out because I wanted their attention." Grace heard the carefully neutral tone, but she could read between the lines. A lonely little boy, desperate for connection, acting out in increasingly dramatic ways to get noticed by parents who were too busy building an empire to see their son's emotional needs. "Is that why you're so different with Autumn?" Grace asked gently. "So present and attentive?" Bennett's eyes met hers across the table, and she saw a flash of vulnerability before he looked away. "I never want her to feel like she has to earn my attention. She's the most important thing in my world, and I want her to know that every single day." "I do know that, Daddy," Autumn said matter-of-factly, reaching over to pat his hand. "You tell me all the time. Sometimes Mrs. Patterson says you spoil me, but I think you just love me a lot." More than the whole universe, Bennett confirmed, kissing the top of his daughter's head. Grace felt her throat tighten, watching the easy affection between them. This was what love looked like. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but presence, attention, the daily choice to prioritize someone else's happiness over your own convenience. "What about you?" Bennett asked, turning his attention back to Grace. "Were you always determined to be a doctor?" Grace smiled, remembering. "Since I was 6 years old. My grandmother had a heart attack, and I watched the paramedics save her life. I decided right then that I wanted to be the person who helped people when they were scared and hurting." "The same grandmother who taught you about the honey remedy?" Bennett asked. "Yes." Grace's voice softened with memory. "Nana Rose. She was an incredible woman, a nurse before she had children, then a mother of 5 who somehow always knew exactly how to fix whatever was wrong. Scraped knees, broken hearts, nightmares, friendship drama, she had a remedy for everything." "She sounds wonderful," Bennett said. "She was my hero," Grace said simply. "When I was little, I used to follow her around her garden while she explained which herbs helped with different ailments. She said modern medicine was powerful, but sometimes the old ways worked just as well, especially when combined with love and attention." "Is she why you became a pediatric surgeon specifically?" Grace nodded, then hesitated. There was more to the story, parts she rarely shared with anyone. But something about the morning light streaming through the windows, about Autumn's trusting presence and Bennett's genuine interest, made her want to be honest. "That and—" Grace took a breath. "My younger brother Tommy had leukemia when he was 7. I was 12, and I spent months watching him suffer through treatments, seeing how scared he was, how helpless my parents felt. The pediatric oncology team at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia became like family to us. They saved his life, but more than that, they made him feel brave and hopeful even during the worst of it." "Where is Tommy now?" Autumn asked, completely absorbed in the story. "He's a teacher in Seattle," Grace said, smiling. "Married to a wonderful woman named Jessica, with twin girls who are about your age. He says he became a teacher because he wanted to be the adult who made kids feel safe and valued, the way his doctors made him feel." "That's beautiful," Bennett said quietly. "Your whole family sounds like they're in the business of taking care of people." "I suppose we are," Grace agreed. "Nana Rose always said that helping others wasn't just a job, it was a calling. She used to tell me that some people are put on this earth to be healers, and that it was both a gift and a responsibility." "She was right," Bennett said, his eyes serious. "What you did last night, that wasn't just medical training. That was instinct, compassion, the kind of healing that comes from the heart." Grace felt heat creep up her neck under his intense gaze. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Bennett said firmly. "You did what you were meant to do. There's a difference." Before Grace could respond, Autumn piped up with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Dr. Grace, do you have a husband? Because Daddy doesn't have a wife, and Mrs. Patterson says he needs someone to take care of him." "Autumn!" Bennett's face flushed red. "That's not appropriate to ask." "It's okay," Grace said, though her own cheeks were warm. "No, sweetheart, I don't have a husband anymore. I got divorced a few months ago." "Why?" Autumn asked with characteristic directness. Grace glanced at Bennett, who was looking mortified by his daughter's interrogation, but also clearly interested in the answer. "Sometimes," Grace said carefully, "two people can care about each other but want different things from life. My ex-husband and I, we had different ideas about what was important." It was the diplomatic version of the truth. The real story was messier, more painful, and definitely not appropriate for 8-year-old ears. But Bennett's perceptive gaze told her he understood there was more to it. "That's sad," Autumn said with the simple empathy of childhood. "But maybe now you can find someone who wants the same things you want." "Maybe," Grace said softly, acutely aware of Bennett's attention. The conversation was interrupted by Bennett's phone buzzing with what appeared to be an urgent message. He frowned as he read it, his expression shifting from relaxed to concerned. "What is it?" Grace asked. "Flight update," Bennett said grimly. "Our 10 a.m. flight has been cancelled. The earliest they can get us out is 4 p.m., and that's only if the weather cooperates. More time in Denver," Autumn announced cheerfully. "Can we go see the snow? I've never touched real snow before." Bennett smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm, but Grace could see the tension in his shoulders. He was probably supposed to be in important meetings, dealing with business emergencies that couldn't wait. "Don't you need to work?" Grace asked. "I'm sure you have people expecting you in Los Angeles." "Nothing that can't be rescheduled," Bennett said, though Grace suspected that wasn't entirely true. "Besides, Autumn's right. How often do we get an unexpected day to just be present?" It was such a simple concept, but Grace realized how foreign it had become to her own life. When was the last time she'd had a day with no agenda, no schedule, no urgent responsibilities demanding her attention? "There's a park across from the hotel," Bennett said, already pulling up information on his phone. "City Park. It has a lake and walking trails. If you'd like to join us." The invitation hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. Grace knew she should decline, should use the delay to catch up on medical journals or prepare for her presentation in Los Angeles. The smart thing would be to maintain appropriate boundaries with a man who was clearly affecting her judgment. But then she looked at Autumn's hopeful face, at Bennett's carefully neutral expression that didn't quite hide his hope, and she found herself nodding. "I'd love to see some snow too," she said. Autumn cheered, and Bennett's smile was radiant. As they cleared the breakfast dishes and prepared for their impromptu adventure, Grace caught her reflection in the window. She looked relaxed, happy in a way she hadn't in months. Maybe sometimes the smart thing wasn't the right thing. Maybe sometimes you had to trust your instincts and see where an unexpected path might lead. Outside, Denver glittered under its blanket of fresh snow, and for the first time in years, Grace was excited to have nowhere urgent to be. Grace woke to the sound of soft laughter filtering through the connecting door. For a moment, she forgot where she was, her apartment in Philadelphia seeming like a distant memory. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. The flight, Autumn's attack, Bennett's grateful eyes, and the way her heart had stuttered when he draped his coat around her shoulders. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing that the snowstorm had passed, leaving Denver transformed into a winter wonderland. The mountains stood majestic against a brilliant blue sky, their peaks crowned with fresh powder that caught the early sunlight like diamonds. Another peal of giggles from next door made Grace smile despite herself. She could hear Autumn's voice, bright and animated, followed by Bennett's deeper tones. The easy affection between them was evident even through the walls, and Grace found herself curious about their morning routine. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague Dr. Martinez. "Flight updates? Hope you made it to LA safely. Emergency surgery went well. Patient asking for you specifically." Grace stared at the message, reality crashing back. She had a life in Philadelphia, patients who needed her, responsibilities that didn't include getting emotionally entangled with a billionaire CEO and his adorable daughter. She typed back quickly, delayed in Denver due to storm. Will update when I have new flight info. A soft knock on the connecting door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Grace? Are you awake? Autumn's voice was barely above a whisper. Grace quickly pulled on the hotel robe and opened the door to find Autumn standing there in bright pink leggings and a sunshine yellow sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that Bennett had clearly attempted with varying degrees of success. Good morning, sweetheart. How are you feeling? Really good. I used my inhaler when I woke up like you said, and my breathing feels perfect. Autumn beamed up at her. Daddy's ordering breakfast, and he said I could ask if you want to eat with us. He's being all weird and nervous about it, though. Grace couldn't help but smile at Autumn's brutal honesty. Weird and nervous how? He keeps fixing his hair and checking his phone and asking me if his sweater looks okay, Autumn reported with 8-year-old matter-of-factness. Mrs. Patterson says men get like that when they like a lady. Heat crept up Grace's neck. Autumn, I don't think. It's okay, Autumn said quickly. I like you too. You smell like flowers and you have kind eyes, and you saved my life. Plus, you listen to me when I talk, not like some grown-ups who just pretend to listen. The simple statement hit Grace harder than she expected. When was the last time someone had described her as having kind eyes? Her ex-husband used to call her intense and too serious. But this little girl saw kindness in her, and somehow that mattered more than any professional accolade. Give me 5 minutes to get dressed, and I'll join you for breakfast, Grace said. Autumn's face lit up. Really? Daddy's going to be so happy. He was asking Mrs. Patterson on the phone earlier if he should invite you, and she told him to stop being a scaredy cat. Grace laughed despite herself. Mrs. Patterson sounds like a wise woman. She is. She says I should trust my instincts about people, and my instincts say you're good for Daddy. Before Grace could respond to that loaded statement, Autumn had skipped back to her suite, leaving Grace to process the implications of an 8-year-old's matchmaking instincts. Grace dressed quickly in her spare clothes, dark jeans and a soft lavender cashmere sweater that brought out the green in her eyes. She'd packed light for what was supposed to be a quick trip to Los Angeles, never expecting to be stranded in Denver with the most intriguing man she'd met in years. When she knocked on Bennett's door, he opened it immediately, as if he'd been waiting nearby. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a forest green pullover that made his brown eyes look almost amber in the morning light. His hair was indeed perfectly arranged, though Grace could see the effort behind the casual style. Good morning, he said, and there was something almost shy in his expression that made Grace's pulse quicken. Did you sleep well? Like a baby, Grace said, then immediately regretted the phrase given Autumn's presence. I mean very well. Thank you. The mountains are incredible this morning, Bennett said, gesturing toward the windows. I've been to Denver dozens of times for business, but I don't think I've ever really seen it before. Grace knew exactly what he meant. How often did any of them really see the beauty around them when they were rushing from one obligation to the next? Dr. Grace, look what Daddy ordered. Autumn called from the dining table, which had been set up with white linens and an impressive breakfast spread. Pancakes with blueberries and whipped cream, and bacon, and fresh fruit, and orange juice that's not from a box. The table could have fed 6 people, but Grace was learning that Bennett didn't do anything halfway. There were also Belgian waffles, scrambled eggs, breakfast potatoes, and what appeared to be fresh-baked pastries. This looks amazing, Grace said, settling into the chair Bennett held out for her. Though I think you've ordered enough food for the entire hotel. I wasn't sure what you liked, Bennett said, and there was that shy uncertainty again. Autumn insisted on the pancakes, and I thought you might prefer something lighter, but then I realized I don't actually know anything about your preferences. Bennett, Grace said gently, touched by his nervousness. It's perfect. Thank you. As they ate, Autumn kept up her usual cheerful chatter, but Grace noticed Bennett watching her carefully, as if trying to memorize every expression, every gesture. It was flattering and slightly overwhelming to be the focus of such intense attention. Daddy, tell Dr. Grace about when you were little and you got stuck in the tree, Autumn suggested, spreading whipped cream on her pancakes with artistic enthusiasm. Autumn, I don't think Dr. Grace needs to hear about my childhood disasters, Bennett said, but he was smiling. Actually, I'd love to hear about them, Grace said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. I have a hard time picturing you as anything other than completely in control. Bennett's laugh was rueful. Trust me, control is something I learned, not something I was born with. I was actually a pretty wild kid. Really wild, Autumn confirmed solemnly. Mrs. Patterson says you gave your parents gray hair. Mrs. Patterson exaggerates, Bennett said, but his expression had grown thoughtful. Though I suppose I was restless. My parents worked a lot, traveled constantly for their business. I spent most of my childhood with various nannies and housekeepers, and I think I acted out because I wanted their attention. Grace heard the carefully neutral tone, but she could read between the lines. A lonely little boy, desperate for connection, acting out in increasingly dramatic ways to get noticed by parents who were too busy building an empire to see their son's emotional needs. Is that why you're so different with Autumn? Grace asked gently. So present and attentive? Bennett's eyes met hers across the table, and she saw a flash of vulnerability before he looked away. I never want her to feel like she has to earn my attention. She's the most important thing in my world, and I want her to know that every single day. I do know that, Daddy, Autumn said matter-of-factly, reaching over to pat his hand. You tell me all the time. Sometimes Mrs. Patterson says you spoil me, but I think you just love me a lot. More than the whole universe, Bennett confirmed, kissing the top of his daughter's head. Grace felt her throat tighten watching the easy affection between them. This was what love looked like, not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but presence, attention, the daily choice to prioritize someone else's happiness over your own convenience. What about you? Bennett asked, turning his attention back to Grace. Were you always determined to be a doctor? Grace smiled, remembering. Since I was 6 years old. My grandmother had a heart attack, and I watched the paramedics save her life. I decided right then that I wanted to be the person who helped people when they were scared and hurting. The same grandmother who taught you about the honey remedy? Bennett asked. Yes. Grace's voice softened with memory. Nana Rose. She was an incredible woman, a nurse before she had children, then a mother of 5 who somehow always knew exactly how to fix whatever was wrong. Scraped knees, broken hearts, nightmares, friendship drama, she had a remedy for everything. She sounds wonderful, Bennett said. She was my hero, Grace said simply. When I was little, I used to follow her around her garden while she explained which herbs helped with different ailments. She said modern medicine was powerful, but sometimes the old ways worked just as well, especially when combined with love and attention. Is she why you became a pediatric surgeon specifically? Grace nodded, then hesitated. There was more to the story, parts she rarely shared with anyone. But something about the morning light streaming through the windows, about Autumn's trusting presence and Bennett's genuine interest, made her want to be honest. That and... Grace took a breath. My younger brother Tommy had leukemia when he was 7. I was 12, and I spent months watching him suffer through treatments, seeing how scared he was, how helpless my parents felt. The pediatric oncology team at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia became like family to us. They saved his life, but more than that, they made him feel brave and hopeful even during the worst of it. "Where is Tommy now?" Autumn asked, completely absorbed in the story. "He's a teacher in Seattle," Grace said, smiling. "Married to a wonderful woman named Jessica, with twin girls who are about your age. He says he became a teacher because he wanted to be the adult who made kids feel safe and valued, the way his doctors made him feel." "That's beautiful," Bennett said quietly. "Your whole family sounds like they're in the business of taking care of people." "I suppose we are," Grace agreed. "Nana Rose always said that helping others wasn't just a job, it was a calling. She used to tell me that some people are put on this earth to be healers, and that it was both a gift and a responsibility." "She was right," Bennett said, his eyes serious. "What you did last night, that wasn't just medical training. That was instinct, compassion, the kind of healing that comes from the heart." Grace felt heat creep up her neck under his intense gaze. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Bennett said firmly. "You did what you were meant to do. There's a difference." Before Grace could respond, Autumn piped up with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Dr. Grace, do you have a husband? Because Daddy doesn't have a wife, and Mrs. Patterson says he needs someone to take care of him." "Autumn!" Bennett's face flushed red. "That's not appropriate to ask." "It's okay," Grace said, though her own cheeks were warm. "No, sweetheart, I don't have a husband anymore. I got divorced a few months ago." "Why?" Autumn asked with characteristic directness. Grace glanced at Bennett, who was looking mortified by his daughter's interrogation, but also clearly interested in the answer. "Sometimes," Grace said carefully, "two people can care about each other but want different things from life. My ex-husband and we had different ideas about what was important. It was the diplomatic version of the truth. The real story was messier, more painful, and definitely not appropriate for 8-year-old ears. But Bennett's perceptive gaze told her he understood there was more to it. "That's sad," Autumn said with the simple empathy of childhood. "But maybe now you can find someone who wants the same things you want." "Maybe," Grace said softly, acutely aware of Bennett's attention. The conversation was interrupted by Bennett's phone buzzing with what appeared to be an urgent message. He frowned as he read it, his expression shifting from relaxed to concerned. "What is it?" Grace asked. "Flight update," Bennett said grimly. "Our 10 a.m. flight has been cancelled. The earliest they can get us out is 4 p.m., and that's only if the weather cooperates. More time in Denver," Autumn announced cheerfully. "Can we go see the snow? I've never touched real snow before." Bennett smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm, but Grace could see the tension in his shoulders. He was probably supposed to be in important meetings, dealing with business emergencies that couldn't wait. "Don't you need to work?" Grace asked. "I'm sure you have people expecting you in Los Angeles." "Nothing that can't be rescheduled," Bennett said, though Grace suspected that wasn't entirely true. "Besides, Autumn's right. How often do we get an unexpected day to just be present?" It was such a simple concept, but Grace realized how foreign it had become to her own life. When was the last time she'd had a day with no agenda, no schedule, no urgent responsibilities demanding her attention? "There's a park across from the hotel," Bennett said, already pulling up information on his phone. City Park. It has a lake and walking trails. If you'd like to join us. The invitation hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. Grace knew she should decline, should use the delay to catch up on medical journals or prepare for her presentation in Los Angeles. The smart thing would be to maintain appropriate boundaries with a man who was clearly affecting her judgment. But then she looked at Autumn's hopeful face, at Bennett's carefully neutral expression that didn't quite hide his hope, and she found herself nodding. "I'd love to see some snow too," she said. Autumn cheered, and Bennett's smile was radiant. As they cleared the breakfast dishes and prepared for their impromptu adventure, Grace caught her reflection in the window. She looked relaxed, happy in a way she hadn't in months. Maybe sometimes the smart thing wasn't the right thing. Maybe sometimes you had to trust your instincts and see where an unexpected path might lead. Outside, Denver glittered under its blanket of fresh snow, and for the first time in years, Grace was excited to have nowhere urgent to be. What do you think Bennett is hiding about his business empire? Drop your theories in the comments, and hit that like button if you're hoping these two find their way to love. The crisp mountain air bit at their cheeks as they stepped out of the hotel, but the sun was brilliant against the fresh snow, making everything sparkle like a scene from a winter fairy tale. Grace pulled her burgundy wool coat tighter around herself, grateful she'd packed warmer clothes for what was supposed to be a quick business trip. Autumn practically bounced beside them, her bright turquoise puffer jacket making her look like a small, excited bird. She'd insisted on wearing her rainbow-striped mittens, a gift from Mrs. Patterson, she'd explained, and her breath came out in delighted puffs as she chattered non-stop about all the snow activities she'd seen in movies but never experienced. "Daddy, can we build a snowman? And make snow angels? Oh, can we have a snowball fight?" Autumn's eyes were wide with possibility as they crossed the street toward the park entrance. Bennett laughed, the sound rich and warm in the cold air. "Let's see how much energy you have after walking in the snow for 5 minutes, little bird." Grace noticed how Bennett's entire demeanor had shifted from the controlled CEO of yesterday to this relaxed, playful father. He wore dark jeans and a thick navy wool sweater that brought out the blue flecks in his brown eyes, and when he laughed at Autumn's excitement, years seemed to fall away from his face. City Park stretched before them like a winter wonderland. The lake was partially frozen, its surface reflecting the brilliant blue sky and snow-laden trees. Families were already out enjoying the unexpected gift of fresh powder, children shrieking with delight as they sled down gentle slopes while parents sipped steaming coffee from thermoses. "It's perfect," Grace breathed, and she meant it. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, their peaks crowned with clouds that looked painted against the azure sky. "I can't remember the last time I just stopped to appreciate something beautiful." "That makes 2 of us," Bennett said quietly, but when Grace glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the scenery. Heat bloomed in her chest despite the cold air. There was something in his gaze, an intensity that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the growing connection between them. "Dr. Grace, look." Autumn had run ahead to where the snow was deepest, immediately dropping to make her first snow angel. "This is the most amazing thing ever." Grace laughed, watching Autumn's pure joy. "She's incredible, Bennett. You've raised an amazing little girl." "I can't take all the credit," Bennett said, his voice soft with emotion. "Mrs. Patterson likes to remind me that Autumn came into this world with her own beautiful spirit. I just try not to mess it up too badly." They walked slowly along the winding path, their feet crunching in the snow while Autumn explored every drift and icicle with the wonder of a child experiencing magic for the first time. Grace found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months, maybe years. There was something about this moment, the three of them moving through this sparkling landscape like a family that felt both surreal and perfectly natural. "Can I ask you something?" Bennett said after they'd been walking for several minutes in comfortable silence. "Of course. Yesterday, when you saved Autumn, you didn't hesitate for even a second. Do you always react that quickly in medical emergencies?" Grace considered the question. Training helps, but honestly, it was more instinct than anything else. When I saw her struggling to breathe, everything else just disappeared. There was only what needed to be done. "That's exactly what I mean," Bennett said, stopping to face her. "You could have been anyone on that plane. A lawyer, a teacher, an accountant. But you were exactly who Autumn needed, exactly when she needed you. Do you believe in fate, Grace?" The question caught her off guard. Grace had always been a woman of science, someone who believed in evidence and logic rather than cosmic intervention. But looking at Bennett now, his eyes serious and searching, she found her certainty wavering. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. "I've always believed we make our own destiny through hard work and determination. But yesterday—" She trailed off, unsure how to articulate the feeling that had been growing since the moment she'd looked into his eyes across the airplane aisle. "Yesterday felt like something bigger than coincidence," Bennett finished. "Yes," Grace whispered, the word barely audible over the sound of children playing in the distance. They were standing close now, close enough that Grace could see the golden flecks in Bennett's eyes, could smell the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with the clean mountain air. The space between them felt charged, full of possibility and promise. "Daddy! Dr. Grace! Come help me!" Autumn's voice broke the spell, and they turned to see her attempting to roll an enormous snowball for the base of her snowman. "This is way harder than it looks in movies." Bennett chuckled, the tension breaking but not disappearing entirely. "Coming, little bird." For the next hour, they worked together to build what Autumn declared was the most magnificent snowman in the history of snowmen. Bennett provided the muscle for the heavy lifting. Grace contributed engineering expertise to ensure structural integrity, and Autumn supervised with the authority of a seasoned architect. "He needs a face," Autumn announced once they'd successfully stacked 3 progressively smaller snowballs. "And arms, and a hat, and—" She looked around the park hopefully. "Maybe a scarf." "I might have something," Grace said, unwinding her own soft purple scarf. "Will this work?" "It's perfect," Autumn declared, carefully wrapping the scarf around their creation's neck. "Now he looks fancy, like Daddy when he goes to work." Bennett raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure if I should be flattered or offended that you think I look like a snowman in a suit." "A very handsome snowman," Grace said teasingly, then blushed at her own boldness. "The handsomest snowman in all of Denver," Autumn agreed seriously, then giggled at her own joke. They found stones for the snowman's eyes and buttons, and a stick that Autumn declared looked perfectly nose-like. As they put the finishing touches on their creation, Grace felt a lightness in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. When was the last time she'd played like this? When had she last done something purely for joy, without any practical purpose or professional objective? "Picture time," Autumn announced, pulling out Bennett's phone with the confidence of a child who'd grown up with technology. "We need to document this historic moment." Grace started to step back, but Autumn grabbed her hand firmly. "No way! You're part of the snowman team. You have to be in the picture." Before Grace could protest, she found herself positioned between Bennett and Autumn in front of their snowy masterpiece. Bennett's arm came around her shoulders naturally, and Autumn pressed close to her other side, and suddenly Grace understood what people meant when they talked about moments feeling perfect. "Say snow," Autumn called out, and they all laughed as she snapped several photos. "Let me take one of just you and your dad," Grace offered, reaching for the phone. "No," Autumn said quickly. "I want you in all of them. These are going to be some of my favorite pictures ever." Grace's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. This little girl, who'd known her for less than 24 hours, wanted her in her favorite pictures. When was the last time someone had made Grace feel so instantly, unconditionally welcomed? "Hey," Bennett said softly, noticing her expression. "You okay?" This is really nice," Grace managed. "I'd forgotten how good it feels to just be silly and have fun." "Your ex-husband wasn't the playful type?" Bennett asked gently. Grace shook her head. Marcus was very serious, very focused on achievement and status. He thought things like building snowmen were childish, a waste of time that could be better spent on productive activities. "What a jerk," Autumn said matter-of-factly, then looked slightly guilty. "Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to call grown-ups names, but anyone who thinks making snowmen is dumb is definitely a jerk." Grace burst out laughing. "You know what, sweetheart? You're absolutely right." Bennett was watching Grace with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What happened?" he asked quietly. "In your marriage, I mean. If you don't mind me asking." Grace was quiet for a moment, watching Autumn add finishing touches to their snowman while she considered how much to share. There was something about Bennett that made her want to be honest, to let him see the real her instead of the polished professional version she usually presented to the world. "Marcus is a successful orthopedic surgeon," she began slowly. "We met during our residencies, and for a while, our shared ambition felt like enough. We were both driven, both determined to excel in our careers. But somewhere along the way, I realized that for him, success meant more than just being a good doctor. It meant the right house, the right car, the right social connections." "And you wanted something different?" "I wanted medicine to be about healing people, not building a medical empire," Grace said. "I chose pediatric surgery because I wanted to help children, to make their scared moments less frightening. Marcus thought I was limiting myself, that I should specialize in something more prestigious, more profitable." Bennett's jaw tightened slightly. "He actually said that?" "Among other things," Grace said, old hurt creeping into her voice. "He thought I was too emotional, too invested in my patients. He said I needed to learn to maintain professional distance, that caring too much would burn me out and hurt my career advancement." "But caring is what makes you extraordinary at what you do," Bennett said with quiet intensity. "It's not a weakness, Grace. It's your greatest strength." The sincerity in his voice made Grace's heart skip. Marcus had never understood that her empathy wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but an essential part of who she was as both a doctor and a person. "The final straw was when I told him I wanted to do medical missions," Grace continued. "There's an organization that sends pediatric surgeons to Central America to perform operations on children who wouldn't otherwise have access to care. I wanted to volunteer for 3 weeks during my vacation time." "And he objected?" "He said it was a foolish waste of my talents, that I should be networking with department heads or attending medical conferences instead. He couldn't understand why I would want to work for free when I could be building connections that would advance my career." Grace's voice grew quiet. "That's when I realized we didn't just want different things from our careers. We wanted different things from life." Bennett was quiet for a moment, processing her words. "Did you go on the medical mission?" Grace smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she'd worn while discussing her marriage. I left for Guatemala the week after our divorce was finalized. It was the most meaningful 3 weeks of my professional life. Good for you, Bennett said with genuine admiration. What was it like? Incredible, Grace said, her face lighting up with the memory. We operated on children with cleft palates, heart defects, orthopedic issues that had been limiting their mobility for years. I'll never forget this one little boy, Carlos, who was 7 years old and had never been able to run because of a birth defect in his leg. After his surgery, when he took his first running steps. Grace's voice caught with emotion. His mother started crying, and he looked at her with such confusion because he couldn't understand why running would make anyone sad. He didn't realize how extraordinary it was because to him, joy was just the natural result of being able to move freely. That's beautiful, Bennett said softly. It reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place, Grace said. It wasn't about building a reputation or accumulating accolades. It was about moments like that, being able to give someone the gift of a normal, healthy life. They were walking again now, following Autumn as she explored a grove of snow-covered evergreens that looked like something from a Christmas card. The morning sun was growing stronger, and the snow was beginning to develop a slight crust that crunched satisfyingly under their feet. I envy you, Bennett said unexpectedly. Why? You know exactly why you do what you do. Your purpose is so clear, so meaningful. You save children's lives, Grace. You make families whole again. That's... He shook his head. That's everything. There was something in his voice, a wistfulness, maybe even sadness, that made Grace study his profile more carefully. What about you? She asked. What drives you in your work? Bennett was quiet for so long that Grace began to think he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Honestly, I'm not sure anymore. I started my company because I wanted to prove something. To my parents, to myself, to everyone who thought I was just a rich kid playing with daddy's money. Building something successful felt like validation that I was worth something beyond my family name. And now it's mostly about providing for Autumn, making sure she never has to worry about anything. But the day-to-day work... Bennett shrugged. It's acquisitions and mergers, market analysis and profit projections. Important for the people I employ, for the shareholders, but not exactly life-changing in the way that your work is. Grace heard the dissatisfaction he was trying to hide. What would you do if you could do anything? Bennett stopped walking and turned to look at her, surprised by the question. No one's ever asked me that before. Really? Really? Most people assume that running a successful company is automatically fulfilling, that financial success equals personal satisfaction. But it doesn't. Not always, Bennett admitted. Don't get me wrong. I'm grateful for the opportunities my success has given me, especially the ability to be present for Autumn in ways my parents never were for me. But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to do work that directly helped people, like yours does. You could, Grace said simply. You have resources that most people don't. You could start a foundation, fund research, create programs that change lives. Bennett looked at her with something like wonder. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is, Grace said. Maybe we overcomplicate things because we think meaningful work has to be complicated or difficult to find. Before Bennett could respond, Autumn came running back to them, her cheeks flushed pink with cold and excitement. There's a lake, she announced breathlessly. And there are ducks. In the snow. Can we go see them? Please. Lead the way, little bird, Bennett said, his contemplative mood shifting back to indulgent father mode. The lake was indeed populated with a small flock of hardy ducks who seemed unbothered by the snow surrounding their partially frozen habitat. Autumn was enchanted, kneeling at the edge of the water to watch them paddle around the unfrozen sections. They look so cozy, she observed, like they have little invisible coats keeping them warm. That's actually not far from the truth, Grace said, settling on a bench where she could keep an eye on Autumn while enjoying the peaceful scene. Ducks have special feathers that trap air and keep them insulated, like wearing a down jacket. Really? Autumn's eyes went wide with interest. That's so cool. Are there other animals that have built-in coats? Grace found herself explaining the various ways different animals adapted to cold weather, while Bennett sat beside her on the bench, occasionally adding his own observations, but mostly just watching Grace interact with his daughter with an expression of quiet amazement. "You're wonderful with her," he said during a lull in the animal adaptation discussion. "She's easy to talk to," Grace said. "She's curious about everything, and she actually listens to the answers. A lot of adults could learn from her example." "She likes you," Bennett said. "A lot. And Autumn is usually careful with new people." "Careful how?" "She's friendly, but she keeps most people at arm's length. She's learned that a lot of the adults in our world are more interested in what they can get from me than in actually knowing her." Bennett's voice carried a note of old pain. "But with you, she's completely open. She trusts you instinctively." Grace watched Autumn trying to communicate with the ducks through a series of soft quacking sounds. Her whole face lit up with delight when one of them actually seemed to respond. "Maybe because I'm not trying to get anything from either of you," Grace said quietly. "I just enjoy spending time with you both." "Is that really all it is?" Bennett asked, and when Grace turned to look at him, his eyes were serious, searching. The question hung between them, loaded with implication. Grace felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the moment for what it was. A crossroads where she could retreat into safe, polite boundaries or step forward into something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "No," she said softly, holding his gaze. "It's not all it is." Bennett's breath caught slightly. "Grace." "I know it's complicated," she said quickly. "I know we barely know each other, and we live in different cities, and we come from completely different worlds. I know all the logical reasons why this is probably a terrible idea. But yesterday when I saw Autumn struggling to breathe, and I saw the fear in your eyes, something inside me just knew. Not knew that you were wealthy or successful or any of the external things. I knew that you were a good man, a loving father, someone who would move mountains for the people he cared about." Grace's voice grew softer. "And this morning, watching you build snowmen and listen to 8-year-old theories about duck coats, I keep thinking that maybe sometimes the heart knows things that logic can't explain." Bennett reached over and took her gloved hand in his, the simple contact sending warmth shooting up her arm. "I've been thinking the same thing," he said. "I've spent the last 5 years building walls around my heart because I thought protecting Autumn meant protecting us both from getting too attached to anyone who might leave. But with you, with me, with you, all those careful walls feel like they're made of paper." Bennett's thumb traced across her knuckles through the soft wool of her gloves. "You scare me, Grace Wellington." "Good scared or bad scared?" she asked, though her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "The best kind of scared," Bennett said, his voice rough with emotion. The kind that makes you realize you've been sleepwalking through your life until someone comes along and wakes you up. They were leaning closer to each other now, drawn by an invisible magnetism that seemed to pull them together despite all the rational reasons to maintain distance. Grace could see the gold flecks in Bennett's eyes, could smell the clean scent of his soap mixed with the crisp mountain air. "Daddy! Dr. Grace! Come see!" Autumn's excited voice broke the spell, and they sprang apart just as she came running over with something cupped in her mittened hands. "I found the most perfect stone. It looks exactly like a heart." She opened her hands to reveal a smooth, heart-shaped stone that was indeed remarkably perfect in its symmetry. The surface was dark gray with veins of lighter color running through it like delicate lace. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Grace said, grateful for the interruption before she'd done something foolish like kiss Bennett Blackwood in the middle of a public park. "I want you to have it," Autumn announced, holding the stone out to Grace. "Because you saved my life, and because you're nice to me, and because you make Daddy smile in a way that makes his whole face look different." Grace's throat tightened with emotion as she accepted the small gift. "Autumn, this is so special. Are you sure you don't want to keep it?" "I'm sure," Autumn said firmly. "Besides, now whenever you look at it, you'll remember today and our snowman and the ducks, and maybe you'll remember that I think you're really great." Grace had to blink back tears as she carefully tucked the stone into her coat pocket. "I will definitely remember that. Thank you, sweetheart. Can we get hot chocolate now?" Autumn asked, apparently satisfied with her gift-giving. "All this snow exploration is making me hungry." Bennett checked his watch and looked surprised. "It's almost noon. Time really does fly when you're having fun." As they made their way back toward the hotel, Autumn skipping ahead while chattering about all the things they'd seen and done, Grace felt the heart-shaped stone warm against her palm through her coat pocket. She'd received plenty of expensive gifts over the years, from grateful patients' families, from Marcus during their relationship, but she couldn't remember anything ever meaning as much as this simple stone given with pure affection by an 8-year-old girl. "She really has taken to you," Bennett said quietly as they walked. "I haven't seen her this open with anyone new since, well, maybe ever." "The feeling is mutual," Grace said, watching Autumn try to catch snowflakes on her tongue. "She's remarkable, Bennett. Curious and kind and so full of joy. You should be incredibly proud." "I am," Bennett said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's the best thing I've ever done with my life." They were approaching the hotel now, and Grace could see the doorman waiting to open the entrance for them. In a few minutes, they'd be back in the warmth of the lobby, and then, what? They'd sit in their separate rooms, waiting for their afternoon flight, pretending that this magical morning hadn't changed everything? "Grace," Bennett said as they reached the hotel steps, his voice urgent, "this doesn't have to end when we get to Los Angeles. Whatever this is between us, it doesn't have to be just a beautiful moment that we remember fondly." Grace turned to face him, acutely aware that they were standing in front of a hotel where anyone could see them, where photographers could be lurking, where the real world was already starting to intrude on their snow globe morning. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'd like to see you again. Properly. When we're both back in our normal lives and can think clearly about what we want." Grace's heart leaped with hope and terror in equal measure. "Bennett, I know it's complicated," he said quickly. "I know there are logistics to figure out and probably a dozen reasons why it won't work. But I also know that I've never felt like this about anyone, and I don't want to let that go without at least trying to see where it might lead." Before Grace could respond, Autumn appeared beside them, tugging on both their hands. "Come on, slowpokes. Hot chocolate is waiting, and I want to sit by the fireplace and tell you my ideas for our next adventure." As they allowed themselves to be pulled into the warmth of the hotel lobby, Grace caught Bennett's eye over Autumn's head. The promise in his gaze made her pulse race with possibility. Maybe some risks were worth taking. Maybe sometimes the heart really did know things that logic couldn't explain. And maybe, just maybe, this unexpected detour in Denver was exactly where she was supposed to be. The California sunshine felt almost aggressive after the gentle snow of Denver, streaming through the massive glass windows of LAX and reflecting off every polished surface. Grace squinted as they made their way through the bustling terminal, her hand instinctively reaching for the heart-shaped stone in her pocket, a tangible reminder that the magical morning in the snow had actually happened. Autumn walked between them, one small hand in Grace's, the other clutching her father's, chattering excitedly about all the things she wanted to show Grace in Los Angeles. The flight had been peaceful, filled with quiet conversation and shared glances that spoke of growing feelings neither adult was quite ready to name aloud. "Can Dr. Grace come to our house for dinner?" Autumn asked for the third time as they approached the baggage claim. "Mrs. Patterson makes the best lasagna, and we have a pool, and I could show her my room and my art studio that Daddy built for me in the attic." "Sweetheart, Dr. Grace probably has her own plans," Bennett said gently, though his eyes met Grace's with a question that had nothing to do with practicality and everything to do with hope. "Actually," Grace began, surprised by her own boldness, "dinner sounds wonderful if you're sure it's not too much trouble." The smile that spread across Bennett's face was worth every logical argument her brain was trying to make about maintaining appropriate boundaries. "It's no trouble at all," he said. "I'd love to show you. Mr. Blackwood." The sharp voice cut through the ambient noise of the airport like a blade. Grace turned to see a severe-looking woman in an immaculate charcoal suit striding toward them, her expression a mixture of relief and barely contained irritation. Behind her trailed two men in dark suits who had the unmistakable bearing of security personnel. "Patricia," Bennett said, his voice cooling several degrees. "I told you I'd call when we landed." "Sir, we have a situation that requires immediate attention," the woman, Patricia, said crisply. Her gaze flicked briefly to Grace and Autumn before focusing entirely on Bennett. "Several urgent matters arose while you were delayed." Grace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The warmth and openness that had characterized Bennett all morning seemed to evaporate before her eyes, replaced by the controlled demeanor of a man accustomed to being in charge of everything around him. "Can't it wait until tomorrow?" Bennett asked, though Grace could hear the resignation already creeping into his voice. "I promised Autumn." "Unfortunately, no, sir. The Jakarta acquisition is threatening to fall through. The board is demanding an emergency meeting about the quarterly projections, and—" Patricia's voice dropped to a murmur as she leaned closer to Bennett, speaking words that Grace couldn't hear but that made Bennett's jaw tighten visibly. While the adults conducted their hushed conference, Autumn tugged on Grace's hand. "That's Patricia," she whispered with the casual acceptance of a child who'd grown up watching her father's work intrude on their personal time. "She's Daddy's assistant, but she's really more like the boss of everyone except Daddy. She's not mean, but she doesn't smile very much, and she always makes Daddy look sad when she talks to him." Grace's heart sank as she watched Bennett's posture change, his shoulders squaring as he shifted into what was clearly his professional mode. This was the billionaire CEO the world knew, not the man who'd built snowmen and listened to 8-year-old theories about duck feathers. "Dr. Grace," Patricia said suddenly, turning her attention to Grace with a kind of polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Patricia Chen, Mr. Blackwood's executive assistant. I understand we have you to thank for Autumn's swift recovery yesterday." The formal tone made Grace feel like she was being dismissed, relegated to the category of helpful stranger, rather than someone who'd spent the last 18 hours becoming part of their small family unit. "It was nothing," Grace said quietly. "I'm just glad I could help." "Indeed. Mr. Blackwood mentioned he'd like to make a substantial donation to your hospital as a token of gratitude. I'll have our foundation team reach out to your administration office to arrange the details." Grace felt heat creep up her neck. A donation to the hospital? As if this was simply a transaction, a business interaction that could be resolved with money and moved past? "That's very generous," she managed, "but completely unnecessary." "Nonsense," Patricia continued briskly. "Mr. Blackwood always ensures that those who provide exceptional service to his family are properly compensated." The word compensated hit Grace like a slap. Service. Is that how Bennett saw what had happened between them? Had she completely misread the situation, mistaking professional gratitude for something deeper? "Patricia," Bennett said sharply, but the damage was already done. Grace could feel herself withdrawing, the wall she'd spent the morning lowering snapping back into place with painful speed. "Sir, I'm afraid we really do need to leave immediately," Patricia pressed on, oblivious to the tension she'd created. "The car is waiting, and traffic to downtown is already backing up. If we leave now, we can make the 4:30 conference call with Tokyo." Bennett looked torn, his gaze moving between Patricia's expectant face and Grace's increasingly closed expression. "Grace, It's fine," Grace said quickly, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "You have responsibilities." "I understand." But even as she said the words, doubt was creeping in. Had the morning in Denver meant as little to him as Patricia seemed to suggest? Had Grace let herself believe in something that existed only in her imagination? "Dr. Grace, you're still coming to dinner, right?" Autumn said anxiously, picking up on the shifting mood even if she didn't understand its source. The hope in the little girl's voice nearly broke Grace's heart. "Sweetheart, your daddy has important work to do. Maybe another time." "But you promised." Autumn's voice rose with the beginning of panic. "You said dinner sounded wonderful. You can't change your mind now." "Autumn, calm down," Bennett said gently but firmly. "Dr. Grace is right. I have some meetings I need to handle, but we'll arrange something soon. I promise." "You always promise that," Autumn said, her eyes filling with tears. "You promised we'd go to Disneyland last month, and you promised we'd have movie night last week, and now you're promising about Dr. Grace, but your work always comes first." The raw hurt in Autumn's voice made Grace's chest tighten with recognition. How many times had she heard similar complaints from the children in her own life? How many promises had been broken in the name of professional obligations? "Mr. Blackwood," Patricia interjected smoothly, "perhaps it would be best if I arranged for a car to take Dr. Grace to her hotel. That way we can." "No," Bennett said firmly. "I'll handle this, Patricia. Give me a minute." But Grace was already stepping back, creating physical distance that matched the emotional chasm that had opened between them in the span of 5 minutes. "It's okay," she said, directing her words to Autumn rather than Bennett. "Your daddy has important things to take care of, sweetheart. That's what daddies who run big companies have to do sometimes." "But I don't want you to go," Autumn said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Please don't go, Dr. Grace. Please stay." The desperation in the child's voice was almost unbearable, but Grace forced herself to remain calm. She knelt down to Autumn's level, gently wiping the tears from her flushed cheeks. "Hey, remember what I told you about being brave? Sometimes being brave means understanding when grown-ups have responsibilities they can't ignore, even when we wish they could. I hate responsibilities, Autumn whispered. I know, baby, Grace said softly. But your daddy works so hard because he loves you and wants to take care of you. That's actually pretty wonderful, even when it doesn't feel wonderful. She stood up slowly, avoiding Bennett's eyes. It was lovely meeting you both. Take care of yourself, Autumn. Grace, wait, Bennett called as she turned to leave. This isn't. I don't want it to end like this. Grace paused but didn't turn around. Some things aren't meant to be more than beautiful moments, Bennett. Maybe that's enough. She walked away before he could respond, before she could see the impact of her words on his face, before she could let herself hope that he might actually choose her over the demands of his empire. Behind her, she could hear Autumn's continued protests and Patricia's efficiently soothing voice explaining that there would be other opportunities for playdates, other chances for new friendships. The casual dismissal of what had felt like the beginning of something profound made Grace's steps quicken toward the exit. She was nearly to the taxi stand when she heard running footsteps behind her. Dr. Grace! Wait! Grace turned to see Autumn racing toward her, Bennett and Patricia several steps behind, both looking harried. Autumn, come back here right now, Bennett called, but his daughter ignored him completely. You forgot this, Autumn panted as she reached Grace, holding out a small wrapped package. I was saving it to give you at dinner, but... Her lower lip trembled. I want you to have it now, so you don't forget us. Grace knelt down and accepted the gift with trembling hands. Inside the tissue paper was a drawing, clearly Autumn's work, showing 3 stick figures building a snowman. One figure had long dark hair and was labeled Dr. Grace. Another had short hair and was labeled Daddy, and the smallest figure with pigtails was labeled Me. Above the scene, in carefully drawn letters, were the words, My best day ever. Autumn, Grace whispered, her vision blurring with unshed tears. I drew it on the airplane, Autumn explained. I wanted you to remember that even if grown-up stuff gets complicated, today was still the best day. And maybe... She glanced back at her father, then leaned closer to Grace. Maybe if you keep it, someday there could be another best day. The simple wisdom of a child's hope was almost Grace's undoing. She pulled Autumn into a fierce hug, breathing in the little girl's scent of strawberry shampoo and innocent faith. Thank you, sweetheart, she managed. This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. When she released Autumn, Grace found Bennett standing nearby, his expression anguished. Grace, please, he said quietly. Let me explain. But Grace shook her head, clutching Autumn's drawing like a lifeline. There's nothing to explain, Bennett. This is your reality. Your world. I understand that now. You don't understand, Bennett said urgently. What happened this morning, what's happening between us, was a beautiful fantasy, Grace finished. But fantasies don't survive in the real world. She hailed a taxi without looking back, afraid that if she saw the pain in his eyes or heard Autumn calling for her again, she might not have the strength to leave. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Grace finally allowed herself to look back through the rear window. Bennett was holding Autumn's hand, both of them standing in the bright California sunshine, looking lost and alone despite being surrounded by the trappings of wealth and success. Grace clutched the child's drawing to her chest and let the tears fall freely as Los Angeles traffic swallowed them from view. 2 hours later, the Beverly Hills Hotel. Grace's hotel room was beautiful, all cream silk and pale gold accents, with French doors that opened onto a private balcony overlooking perfectly manicured gardens. It was the kind of luxury she'd dreamed of experiencing someday, but now it felt hollow, like an expensive frame around an empty picture. She'd ordered room service but barely touched the gourmet meal, instead finding herself staring at Autumn's drawing propped against the lamp on the bedside table. Every detail of the artwork told the story of a little girl who'd found joy in simple pleasures: building snowmen, feeding ducks, spending time with adults who made her feel cherished. A soft knock at the door interrupted her melancholy. Grace assumed it was housekeeping and called out that she didn't need anything, but the knocking persisted. When she finally opened the door, she found a delivery person holding an enormous bouquet of white roses and lily of the valley. Flowers that must have cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. The card, written in Bennett's distinctive handwriting, simply said, "Please don't give up on us. B." Grace stared at the flowers for a long moment before closing the door and setting them on the dresser without reading the card again. Beautiful gesture, expensive sentiment, but it didn't change the fundamental reality of their situation. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then a series of messages that made her heart race despite her determination to remain practical. Bennett. Grace, I need you to know that what Patricia said doesn't reflect how I feel about you. Bennett. This morning meant everything to me. You mean everything to me. Bennett. I handled the situation badly at the airport. I'm sorry. Bennett. Autumn is asking if you're angry with us. I don't know what to tell her. Bennett. Please call me. Let me try to explain. Grace turned off her phone without responding. What was there to say? That she'd let herself believe, for a few magical hours, that love could bridge any gap? That she'd forgotten the lesson Marcus had taught her about the impossibility of competing with a successful man's professional obligations? She'd been foolish to think that what they'd shared in Denver could survive the reality of Bennett's life in Los Angeles. Men like Bennett Blackwood didn't choose heart over empire, especially not for women they'd known for less than 2 days. As evening deepened into night, Grace stood on her balcony looking out at the glittering lights of Beverly Hills and tried to convince herself that she'd made the right choice in walking away. Tomorrow she'd fly back to Philadelphia, return to her pediatric surgery practice, and file this entire experience under beautiful memories that taught important lessons. But even as she made those practical resolutions, her fingers kept finding the heart-shaped stone in her pocket, and her eyes kept drifting to Autumn's drawing with its innocent declaration of "my best day ever." Some part of her heart whispered that maybe she was giving up too easily, that maybe love was supposed to be worth fighting for. But a louder, more practical voice reminded her that she'd already tried believing in love with someone whose career came first, and the ending had been nothing but heartbreak. She wouldn't make that mistake again, no matter how much her heart might be telling her that Bennett Blackwood was nothing like Marcus, nothing like any man she'd ever known. Would she? 3 weeks had passed since Los Angeles, and Grace Wellington had thrown herself into her work with the kind of desperate intensity that her colleagues mistook for renewed passion. She arrived at the hospital before dawn, stayed until the security guards made their final rounds, and filled every moment between surgeries with administrative tasks that didn't require her to think about anything beyond medical charts and treatment protocols. This particular Tuesday morning found her in operating room 3, carefully reconstructing the tiny heart of a 6-month-old baby born with a congenital defect. Her hands moved with their usual precision, but her mind kept drifting to a different child, one with bright blue eyes and an infectious giggle who had taught her that sometimes the best medicine came from unexpected places. "Dr. Wellington, your phone has been buzzing constantly," her surgical nurse, Patricia, whispered. Grace almost flinched at the name, even though this Patricia was nothing like Bennett's ice-cold assistant. This Patricia had warm brown eyes and always remembered to ask about Grace's weekend plans. "It can wait," Grace murmured, adjusting her position to get a better angle on the delicate repair. This little guy needs my full attention." But even as she said the words, Grace's treacherous heart wondered if the calls might be from a certain billionaire who'd been texting her daily since Los Angeles. She'd stopped reading the messages after the first week, but she hadn't been able to bring herself to block his number entirely. The surgery took 4 hours, and Grace emerged from feeling the familiar satisfaction of a successful procedure tempered by an exhaustion that went bone deep. She was pulling off her surgical gown when her phone buzzed again, the 15th time that morning. This time, instead of Bennett's number, she saw her sister Rebecca's name on the screen. Finally! Rebecca's voice was sharp with worry when Grace answered. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. Have you seen the news?" "What news?" Grace asked wearily, sinking into a chair in the break room. "Becca, I just finished a surgery, and I'm not really in the mood for." "Grace, stop talking and listen to me," Rebecca interrupted. "Turn on Channel 6. Now." Something in her sister's tone made Grace reach for the remote control mounted on the break room wall. The local news was just coming back from commercial, and Grace nearly dropped the remote when she saw the headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Local billionaire CEO Blackwood announces major philanthropic initiative. The camera focused on a familiar figure standing behind a podium at what appeared to be a press conference. Bennett looked tired. Grace noticed immediately. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect posture seemed slightly deflated. But when he began speaking, his voice carried the same quiet authority she remembered. "3 weeks ago," Bennett was saying, "my daughter and I experienced something that reminded me what true heroism looks like. When Autumn suffered a severe asthma attack during our flight, we were saved not by wealth or status, but by the quick thinking and compassionate action of a remarkable woman, Dr. Grace Wellington, a pediatric surgeon at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia." Grace's hand flew to her mouth as the camera panned to show a large display board behind Bennett. In bold letters, she read, "The Dr. Grace Wellington Foundation for Emergency Pediatric Care." Bennett continued, his eyes looking directly into the camera as if he could see through the screen to where Grace sat frozen in disbelief. Dr. Wellington used a simple remedy her grandmother had taught her, honey applied to a cloth, to ease my daughter's breathing until we could land safely. But more than that, she showed us what it means to care for others without expectation of reward or recognition. "Oh my God," Grace whispered. "The Dr. Grace Wellington Foundation," Bennett announced, "will provide emergency medical training to flight attendants on all major airlines, fund research into natural remedies that can complement traditional emergency medicine, and ensure that every commercial flight carries comprehensive pediatric emergency kits. We're starting with a $50 million commitment, but this is just the beginning." The camera pulled back to Autumn standing beside her father, wearing a bright turquoise dress and holding a large bouquet of sunflowers. When Bennett finished his announcement, she stepped forward to the microphone. "My daddy says that when someone saves your life, you should never forget them," Autumn said in her clear, sweet voice. "Dr. Grace saved my life, but she also saved my daddy's heart. We miss her every day, and we hope she knows that we love her." Grace's vision blurred with tears as the news anchor's voiceover began explaining the Foundation's mission. Her phone was ringing again, Rebecca calling back, but Grace couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what she'd just witnessed. Bennett had created a foundation in her name. A $50 million foundation dedicated to the exact kind of emergency medicine that had brought them together. "Grace! Grace, are you there?" Rebecca's voice came through the phone speaker. "I'm here," Grace managed weakly. "Honey, this man is in love with you," Rebecca said bluntly. "Like, seriously, desperately in love. You can't tell me you're still planning to ignore him after this." Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to think clearly through the emotional tsunami that had just hit her. It's a grand gesture, Becca. Rich men are good at grand gestures. It doesn't change the fundamental incompatibility of our lives. Are you listening to yourself? Rebecca's exasperation was audible even through the phone. The man just announced to the entire world that you saved his heart. His 8-year-old daughter just said she loves you on live television. What exactly are you waiting for? A handwritten invitation from God. Before Grace could respond, there was a soft knock on the break room door. Dr. Andrew Martinez, the hospital's chief of surgery, poked his head inside. Grace. Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent. Grace's heart leaped, but she forced herself to remain calm. If it's a reporter, Andrew, please just tell them I'm not available for comment. It's not a reporter, Dr. Martinez said with a curious expression. It's Bennett Blackwood, the billionaire from the news. He's in my office with his daughter, and they're asking specifically for you. The phone slipped from Grace's numb fingers, clattering to the floor as Rebecca's distant voice called out, Grace? Grace, what's happening? Grace stood outside Dr. Martinez's office for a full minute, trying to gather the courage to knock. Through the frosted glass door, she could see two silhouettes, one tall, one much smaller, and she could hear the faint sound of Autumn's voice chattering excitedly about something. When she finally knocked and entered, the first thing that struck her was how natural they looked sitting in the sterile hospital environment. Bennett was wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater instead of his usual suit, and Autumn was perched on the edge of her chair, swinging her legs in bright yellow leggings that matched her sunshine-colored cardigan. Dr. Grace! Autumn launched herself from her chair and into Grace's arms before any of the adults could react. I knew you'd come. I told Daddy you would come because you keep your promises. Grace hugged the little girl tightly, breathing in her familiar scent and marveling at how right it felt to hold her again. Over Autumn's head, her eyes met Bennett's, and she saw relief, hope, and something that looked very much like love shining in his blue gaze. Hello, Grace, he said softly. Thank you for seeing us. I saw the news, Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. The foundation. Bennett, you didn't have to. Yes, I did, he interrupted, standing up but maintaining a respectful distance. Because what you did for us wasn't just medical intervention, Grace. It was love in action. And that kind of love deserves to be honored and multiplied. Autumn finally released Grace from her fierce hug but kept hold of her hand. Daddy's been really sad since you went away, she announced with the brutal honesty of childhood. He pretends he's not, but I can tell because he stares at his phone a lot and he doesn't laugh at my jokes anymore. Autumn, Bennett said gently, a flush creeping up his neck. It's true, Autumn insisted. And I've been sad too because I keep thinking about our snow day and how happy we were. And I don't understand why grown-ups make everything so complicated when kids can just decide to be friends and be happy together. Grace knelt down to Autumn's level, her heart breaking at the confusion and hurt in the child's voice. Sometimes grown-ups get scared, sweetheart. We worry about things that might happen instead of enjoying the good things that are happening right now. Are you scared of us? Autumn asked directly. The question hit Grace like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes, she thought. I was scared, she admitted. I was scared that if I let myself love you and your daddy, something would happen to take that love away, and I'd get hurt again. But you can't know if something bad will happen, Autumn pointed out with 8-year-old logic. So maybe you should just try the love part and see if it makes you happy. Grace glanced up at Bennett, who was watching the exchange with an expression of wonder and profound tenderness. "She's pretty wise for someone who hasn't lost all her baby teeth yet," he said, attempting levity but unable to hide the emotional intensity in his voice. "I lost 2 more," Autumn announced proudly, opening her mouth wide to show the gaps. "The tooth fairy brought me $5 for each one because Daddy said inflation affects everything, even tooth fairy economics." Despite everything, Grace found herself laughing, really laughing for the first time in 3 weeks. $5 per tooth? That's quite an increase from when I was little. "Daddy says it's important to keep up with market trends," Autumn said solemnly, then brightened. "But guess what? I saved the money to buy you a present." She rummaged in her small backpack and pulled out a carefully wrapped package. "I made Daddy take me to 5 different stores to find the perfect thing." Inside the tissue paper was a small snow globe featuring a tiny family of 3 building a snowman. When Grace shook it, artificial snow swirled around the miniature scene, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying. "It's so you can remember our snow day even when it's not snowing," Autumn explained. "And see, there's 3 people in there because that's how many we need to be a proper family. Daddy and me and you." Grace's composure finally cracked. "Autumn, honey." "I know what you're going to say," Autumn interrupted. "You're going to say it's complicated because you live far away and Daddy has work and I have school. But we thought about that, didn't we, Daddy?" Bennett cleared his throat, looking nervous for the first time since Grace had known him. "We did think about that. Quite a lot, actually." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder of papers. "Dr. Martinez and I had a very interesting conversation this morning about the hospital's funding needs and expansion plans." Grace looked between Bennett and Dr. Martinez, who had been quietly observing the entire interaction from behind his desk. "Andrew, what's going on?" "What's going on," Dr. Martinez said with a grin, "is that Mr. Blackwood has just offered to fund the construction of a new pediatric emergency wing, complete with state-of-the-art equipment and a revolutionary natural medicine research component. The catch is that he wants you to head up the entire program." Grace's knees nearly buckled. "He wants me to what?" "The position would come with a substantial salary increase, your own research team, and the opportunity to integrate traditional remedies with modern emergency medicine," Dr. Martinez continued. "It's groundbreaking work, Grace. The kind of program that could change pediatric emergency care nationwide." "And the best part," Autumn chimed in excitedly, "is that Daddy's company has offices in Philadelphia too. So we could move here and I could go to school here and we could have dinner together every night and maybe get a dog." Grace sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were proposing. "You would move here? Leave Los Angeles?" Bennett knelt beside her chair, finally closing the distance he'd been maintaining. "Grace, I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to figure out how to live without you and Autumn asking me every day when you're coming back. The truth is, I can run my company from anywhere. I have excellent people in every office, and most of my work can be done remotely. But I can't run my heart from a distance. I can't love you from 3,000 miles away." "You love me," Grace whispered, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "I've loved you since the moment you refused my money at LAX," Bennett said, his voice thick with emotion. "I loved your strength, your principles, your willingness to walk away from me rather than compromise who you are. I love how you make Autumn laugh, how you listen to her ideas like they're the most important things in the world. I love that you saved my daughter's life with honey and a handkerchief, and that you taught me the difference between grand gestures and genuine love. But your work, your company..." will survive just fine with me as a hands-on CEO who actually prioritizes his family, Bennett interrupted. Grace, you showed me what I was missing. What we were both missing. I don't want to be the kind of father who promises things he can't deliver. I want to be the kind of man who builds snowmen and feeds ducks and shows up for dinner every single night. Autumn bounced on her toes beside them. Does this mean you'll say yes? Please say yes, Dr. Grace. We already picked out a house with a big backyard and everything. Grace looked at this child who had somehow become the center of her universe, then at the man who was offering her not just love, but a complete reimagining of what their lives could be together. You already picked out a house? She asked weakly. Bennett had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. We may have been optimistic, but Autumn insisted it had to have a garden for you to grow herbs for natural remedies, and a big kitchen for family dinners, and a room that could be converted into an art studio because she noticed you doodling medical diagrams on napkins and decided you might like to try real art too. You noticed me doodling? I noticed everything about you, Bennett said simply. The way you hum when you're thinking, how you always check on Autumn twice before you're satisfied she's comfortable, the fact that you haven't thrown away a single text message I've sent you even though you haven't responded to any of them. Grace's eyes widened. How could you possibly know that? Bennett smiled, the first genuine, unreserved smile she'd seen from him since LAX. Because hope recognizes hope, even when it's buried under fear and practical considerations. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat gently. Grace, I don't want to pressure you, but this is an extraordinary opportunity. The research component alone could revolutionize how we approach pediatric emergency care. And frankly, I've never seen you as happy as you were in that news footage from Denver. You saw the news footage? Grace asked in surprise. Everyone saw the news footage, Dr. Martinez replied. It went viral. #SnowDayFamily was trending on social media for days. Apparently, the world is invested in your love story. No pressure, Bennett said dryly, but his eyes were twinkling with amusement. Grace stood up slowly, looking around the room at the faces watching her with varying degrees of hope and expectation. In her pocket, her fingers found the heart-shaped stone Bennett had given her, the one she'd carried every day since Denver despite her determination to move on. I have conditions, she said finally. Bennett's face lit up with cautious optimism. Name them. First, I want to visit this house before any decisions are made final. I'm not moving in with someone whose idea of homey decoration is floor-to-ceiling windows and no comfortable chairs. Done, Bennett said immediately. Although I should mention that Autumn has very strong opinions about furniture comfort. She's already made me promise to get a couch big enough for family movie nights. Second, Grace continued, I want to meet your board of directors and your key employees. If we're doing this, I need to know that the people in your professional life will respect our relationship and our family time. Already arranged, Bennett said. In fact, my board has been asking to meet the woman who managed to convince me to prioritize work-life balance. They're calling you a miracle worker. And third, Grace said, her voice softening as she looked at Autumn's hopeful face, I want to adopt Autumn. Legally. If we're going to be a family, then we're going to be a real family in every sense of the word. Autumn's squeal of delight was audible 3 floors down. She launched herself at Grace again, nearly knocking her over with the force of her enthusiasm. Really? Really? You want to be my real mommy? I want to be your everything, Grace said, tears streaming down her face as she held the little girl tight. Your mommy, your friend, your partner in mischief, your homework helper, your bedtime story reader, and your biggest cheerleader for the rest of your life. Bennett wrapped his arms around both of them, creating a small circle of fierce love and overwhelming joy in the middle of the sterile hospital office. "Is that a yes?" he whispered against Grace's ear. "That's a yes to everything," Grace whispered back. "To the job, to the house, to the family, to the love, to the future we're going to build together." "Even to the dog?" Autumn asked hopefully, her voice muffled against Grace's shoulder. Grace laughed through her tears. "Especially to the dog." Dr. Martinez stood up and began gathering the papers on his desk. "I'll give you all some privacy to work out the details. Grace, take all the time you need to think about the position specifics. And Mr. Blackwood, thank you for this incredible opportunity." As the chief of surgery left his own office to give them space, Bennett, Grace, and Autumn remained wrapped in their embrace, none of them wanting to be the first to let go. "I love you," Bennett said simply. "Both of you. More than I ever thought it was possible to love anything." "I love you too," Grace replied. "I love your daughter, I love your terrible jokes, I love the way you build snowmen, and I love that you were brave enough to fight for us when I was too scared to fight for myself." "I love everyone," Autumn announced. "I love Dr. Grace and Daddy and Mrs. Patterson and my new dog that we're going to get and our new house and snow days and family dinners and everything." "Even vegetables?" Grace teased. "Well," Autumn said thoughtfully, "I love most things. But I'll eat vegetables if it makes you happy." "That's my girl," Grace said, kissing the top of Autumn's head. "Our girl," Bennett corrected gently. "Our girl," Grace agreed, and felt the last of her walls finally, completely crumble. 1 week later, Grace found herself standing on the sidewalk outside a gorgeous 3-story brick townhouse, staring up at its hunter-green shutters and flower boxes that somehow still held late autumn blooms despite the November chill. Bennett stood beside her, jingling a set of keys nervously, while Autumn bounced between them like an excited puppy. "It has original hardwood floors and a renovated kitchen, but we can change anything you don't like," Bennett said quickly, his usual confidence replaced by an endearing uncertainty. "The realtor said the previous owners were a family with young children, so it's very family-friendly." Grace smiled at his obvious anxiety. "Bennett, breathe. I'm not going to change my mind about us just because I don't like the house. But you might change your mind about moving in together if the house feels wrong," he pointed out logically. "Daddy's been practicing this speech all morning," Autumn Stage whispered to Grace. "He kept asking me if he should mention the walk-in closets first or save them for later." "There are walk-in closets?" Grace asked, amused by Bennett's meticulous preparation for what was supposed to be a casual house tour. "3 of them," Autumn said proudly. "Plus a library with built-in bookshelves, and a kitchen island big enough for me to do homework while you cook dinner, and a backyard with apple trees." Bennett unlocked the front door and gestured for Grace to enter first. "After you, Dr. Wellington. Welcome to what could be our home." The moment Grace stepped inside, she understood why Autumn had been so excited. The house felt immediately warm and inviting, with afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows and illuminating polished wood floors that showed the gentle wear of decades of family life. The living room featured a brick fireplace surrounded by built-in bookcases, and Grace could easily imagine them spending winter evenings there. Bennett reading financial reports, Autumn working on school projects, and herself finally having time to explore the art supplies she'd been wanting to try. "The kitchen is through here," Bennett said, leading them down a hallway lined with family photos from the previous owners. "I know you mentioned wanting space to experiment with natural remedies, so I thought you might appreciate the herb garden setup they have going." The kitchen took Grace's breath away. It was spacious but cozy, with white cabinets, butcher block countertops, and a large island exactly as Autumn had described. French doors opened onto a brick patio where raised garden beds were clearly visible, along with a small greenhouse that looked like it had been lovingly maintained. The sellers said the greenhouse has temperature controls for year-round growing, Bennett explained, watching Grace's face carefully. And there's already an established herb garden with medicinal plants, lavender, chamomile, echinacea, even some more exotic varieties. Grace walked to the French doors and peered out at the backyard. It was perfect, not too large to be overwhelming, but spacious enough for a child to play safely. The apple trees Autumn had mentioned were bare now, but Grace could imagine them covered in pink blossoms come spring. "And upstairs?" she asked, turning back to find Bennett and Autumn watching her with matching expressions of hope. "3 bedrooms," Bennett said. "The master suite has those walk-in closets Autumn mentioned, plus a bathroom with a soaking tub that the realtor seemed to think was a major selling point." "Can we show her my room?" Autumn asked excitedly. "It has a window seat and everything." They climbed the stairs together, and Grace marveled at how natural it felt to explore this house with them, to imagine their lives unfolding in these rooms. Autumn's chosen bedroom was indeed perfect for an 8-year-old, painted a cheerful yellow with built-in shelving and a cozy window seat overlooking the garden. "I already know exactly where I want my desk and my bookshelf and my art supplies," Autumn said, bouncing on the window seat. "And see. From here I can watch for when you come home from the hospital." The master bedroom was stunning in its simplicity. High ceilings, large windows, and yes, 2 walk-in closets that were bigger than Grace's entire current bedroom. But what captured her attention was the reading nook by the window, complete with a comfortable chair and perfect lighting. "I can see you reading there," Bennett said softly, coming to stand beside her. Sunday mornings, medical journals scattered around, coffee getting cold while you get lost in research. "And I can see you pretending to read financial reports while actually watching me," Grace replied, surprised by how easily she could envision their shared domestic future. "Guilty as charged," Bennett admitted with a grin. The 3rd bedroom had been set up as a home office by the previous owners, but Bennett had clearly been thinking ahead. "I thought this could be converted into an art studio," he said casually. "The northern exposure is supposed to be ideal for natural lighting, and there's plenty of storage space for supplies." Grace turned to stare at him. "You really have thought of everything, haven't you?" "I've had 3 weeks to plan," Bennett said simply. 3 weeks to imagine what our life together could look like, and to make sure I was prepared to offer you everything you might want or need." "What about what you want and need?" Grace asked. Bennett's expression grew serious. "I want you and Autumn to be happy. I want to come home every evening to family dinner and homework help and bedtime stories. I want to wake up every morning knowing that the people I love most in the world are safe and content. I need you, Grace. Both of you. More than I need business success or social status or anything else I used to think mattered." Before Grace could respond, Autumn came running into the room. "Dr. Grace, come see the basement. Daddy says we can set up a playroom down there and maybe get one of those big TVs for family movie nights." The basement had indeed been finished as a family recreation area, complete with a small kitchenette and plenty of space for both children's activities and adult relaxation. The cellars included the pool table, Bennett noted, gesturing to a beautiful antique table positioned under carefully arranged lighting. "I thought you might enjoy learning to play." "I haven't played pool since college," Grace admitted. "Perfect. I can teach you," Bennett said with a smile that suggested he was looking forward to many evenings of friendly competition. As they concluded the house tour and stood once again in the sun-filled living room, Grace felt a sense of rightness that she'd never experienced before. This wasn't just a house. It was a home waiting to be filled with their love and laughter. "So," Bennett asked, his nervousness returning, "what do you think?" "I think," Grace said slowly, "that Autumn has excellent taste in real estate." Autumn clapped her hands together. "Does that mean yes? Are we going to live here?" Grace looked around the room one more time, imagining Christmas mornings by the fireplace, birthday parties in the backyard, quiet evenings cooking dinner together while Autumn did homework at the kitchen island. She could see their future so clearly now. Not just the big moments, but the small, daily intimacies that would make them a real family. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, we're going to live here. Together." Bennett's relief was visible, his shoulders dropping as tension he'd been carrying for weeks finally released. "Really? You're sure?" "I'm sure," Grace said, then laughed at his continued uncertainty. "Bennett, I just agreed to move in with you, merge our careers, and adopt your daughter. I think we're past the point of me changing my mind over interior design choices." "Good point," Bennett said sheepishly. "Besides," Grace added with a mischievous smile, "I have some conditions about redecorating anyway." "Whatever you want," Bennett said immediately. "New furniture, paint, renovations, anything." "Actually, I was thinking more about additions than changes," Grace said, pulling both Bennett and Autumn closer to her in the middle of their soon-to-be living room. "Like maybe a piano in that corner, for when Autumn decides she wants music lessons. And definitely some comfortable reading chairs by the fireplace. And we'll need to child-proof that pool table until she's older." "What about the dog?" Autumn asked hopefully. "Can we get the dog now?" Grace and Bennett looked at each other over Autumn's head, sharing one of those wordless conversations that couples develop over time. "I think," Bennett said carefully, "that we should probably get settled into the house first, then talk about adding a dog to the family." "But you said yes to the dog," Autumn protested. "Dr. Grace said yes to the dog." "We did say yes," Grace confirmed. "But your daddy is right that we should get moved in and comfortable before we bring a pet home. Dogs need time and attention to adjust to new families, just like people do." Autumn considered this seriously. "Okay, but can we start looking at dogs online? So we can pick one out ahead of time." "Deal," Bennett said, ruffling his daughter's hair. "But first, we need to finalize the house purchase, coordinate Dr. Grace's job transition, and plan our move." "And plan our wedding," Grace added casually, then felt her heart skip a beat at the words that had slipped out without conscious thought. The silence that followed was profound. Bennett stared at Grace with an expression of wonder and disbelief, while Autumn looked between them with growing excitement. "Wedding," Bennett repeated carefully. "As in, you want to marry me?" Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't back down. "Well, we're adopting a child together, buying a house together, and merging our professional lives. It seems like marriage would be the logical next step. Plus, I want to be a flower girl," Autumn announced. "I've never been a flower girl, and Madison Chen at school got to be one for her cousin, and she said it was the best day ever." Bennett stepped closer to Grace, his hands coming up to frame her face gently. "Grace Wellington, are you proposing to me in the living room of our future home?" "Maybe," Grace said, her confidence wavering slightly. "Is that okay? Or would you prefer to do the traditional thing where the man—" Bennett silenced her with a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing unsteadily. "It's more than okay," Bennett said against her lips. "It's perfect." You're perfect. This whole crazy, wonderful situation is perfect. So is that a yes? Grace asked, echoing Autumn's earlier question. That's a yes to everything, Bennett said, borrowing Grace's words from the hospital. To the house, to the marriage, to the dog, to the family we're going to build together. Even to the wedding planning? Grace asked with a grin. Because I should warn you, I have very strong opinions about weddings, and they mostly involve wanting something small and intimate rather than a society spectacle. Especially to avoiding a society spectacle, Bennett said fervently. I was thinking maybe the backyard here, in the spring when the apple trees are blooming. Can I pick out my flower girl dress? Autumn asked, bouncing with excitement. You can pick out your flower girl dress, Grace confirmed. But remember, we want something you'll be comfortable in, not just something that looks pretty in photos. I want a dress that's good for running around and playing after the ceremony, Autumn said pragmatically. Because weddings are supposed to be fun, right? Right, Bennett agreed, lifting his daughter into his arms for a hug. Our wedding is going to be fun and happy and full of love. And dogs? Autumn asked hopefully. We'll see about the dogs, Grace said diplomatically. 6:30 p.m. Rittenhouse Square, local Italian restaurant. That evening, they celebrated their decision with dinner at a small Italian restaurant within walking distance of their new house. Grace found herself studying Bennett and Autumn across the candlelit table, marveling at how completely her life had changed in the span of just a few weeks. Penny for your thoughts, Bennett said, catching her contemplative expression. I was just thinking about how none of this was supposed to happen, Grace said honestly. 6 weeks ago, if someone had told me I'd be engaged to a billionaire and planning to adopt his daughter, I would have suggested they seek psychiatric evaluation. 6 weeks ago, if someone had told me I'd be moving to Philadelphia and restructuring my entire life around family dinners and school pickup schedules, I would have had them escorted from the building, Bennett replied. And if someone had told me I was going to get a new mommy and a new house and maybe a dog all in the same month, I would have said they were silly because that's too many good things to happen all at once, Autumn added, twirling spaghetti around her fork with impressive skill. But sometimes, Grace said thoughtfully, life surprises us with more good things than we think we deserve. Do you think we deserve all this happiness? Bennett asked, his tone serious despite the celebration. Grace considered the question carefully. I think we've all been through enough pain and loneliness to appreciate what we have now. And I think Autumn deserves a family that loves her unconditionally. I already have that, Autumn said matter-of-factly. I've had Daddy my whole life, and now I have you too. Plus Grandma and Grandpa Blackwood, and Aunt Rebecca who's going to be my aunt for real soon, and Mrs. Patterson who makes the best cookies in the world. Aunt Rebecca? Grace asked in surprise. Bennett grinned. Your sister and I had a very interesting phone conversation this afternoon. She wanted to make sure my intentions toward you were honorable. Please tell me you didn't let Rebecca interrogate you, Grace said with horror. I let Rebecca interrogate me, Bennett admitted cheerfully. She's very thorough. I think she'd make an excellent prosecutor. She'd love to hear you say that. She's been considering a career change from social work to law school. Maybe I can put her in touch with our legal department, Bennett suggested. They're always looking for smart people with a passion for justice. Grace shook her head in amazement. You're already thinking about how to help my family integrate into your life. Our life, Bennett corrected. And of course I am. When you love someone, you love their whole world, their family, their friends, their dreams, their fears. You don't get to pick and choose which parts of a person you want to accept. That's very wise, Grace said softly. I learned it from someone pretty smart, Bennett replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. Someone who saved my daughter's life and then taught me how to save my own. As they finished dinner and walked back through the quiet streets of Rittenhouse Square, Grace felt a profound sense of contentment settle over her. The neighborhood was beautiful in the early evening light, with historic brownstones and tree-lined sidewalks that spoke of stability and community. This feels like home already, she said as they paused in front of their house. It feels like the beginning of everything I never knew I wanted, Bennett replied. Autumn, who had been skipping ahead of them, suddenly stopped and turned around. Can we go inside one more time? I want to see my room again and make sure it's still perfect. Bennett unlocked the door and they stepped into the empty house, their footsteps echoing in the unfurnished rooms. But somehow, even without furniture or personal belongings, the space felt alive with possibility. In Autumn's future bedroom, Grace watched as the little girl sat on the window seat and gazed out at the garden. I'm going to sit here every morning when I wake up, Autumn announced. And I'm going to think about how lucky I am to have my family. We're the lucky ones, Grace said, settling beside her on the window seat. We're lucky that you decided we were worth saving. I didn't save you, Autumn protested. You saved me. You made my breathing better on the airplane. You saved us in a different way, Bennett said, joining them by the window. You saved us from being alone. You brought us together and made us a family. As the three of them sat together in the gathering dusk, looking out at the garden where they would soon plant new herbs and flowers, Grace felt the last piece of her heart click into place. This was what love looked like, not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but quiet moments of connection and shared dreams for the future. I love you both, she said simply. More than I ever thought possible. We love you too, Autumn and Bennett said in unison, then looked at each other and burst into laughter. We're going to be very good at this family thing, Grace observed. The best, Autumn agreed confidently. Especially once we get the dog. 6 weeks later, Grace woke up on Christmas morning in her new bed, in her new house, next to the man she was going to marry in 4 months. Pale winter sunlight filtered through the curtains, and she could hear the faint sounds of Autumn moving around downstairs, probably trying to peek at presents while maintaining plausible deniability. Merry Christmas, Dr. Wellington, Bennett murmured against her shoulder, his voice rough with sleep. Merry Christmas, Mr. Blackwood, Grace replied, turning in his arms to face him. Ready for our first Christmas as a family? I've been ready since the moment I met you, Bennett said, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. Though I should probably warn you that Autumn has been up since 5 a.m. She's been remarkably patient, but I don't think she can hold out much longer. As if summoned by their conversation, there was a gentle knock on their bedroom door. Are you awake? Autumn's voice came through the wood. Because if you're awake, it's technically Christmas morning, and if it's Christmas morning, we can officially start Christmas festivities. Grace and Bennett exchanged amused glances. We're awake, Grace called out. Give us 5 minutes to get dressed, and then we'll come down for present opening. 5 minutes exactly, Autumn called back. I'm setting a timer. 20 minutes later, the three of them were settled in their living room around a Christmas tree that Autumn had insisted on decorating entirely with homemade ornaments and strings of popcorn. The pile of presents underneath was modest but thoughtfully chosen, and Grace couldn't help but smile at how different this Christmas felt from the lonely holidays she'd grown accustomed to. Present time, Autumn announced, settling cross-legged on the floor next to their golden retriever puppy, Honey, who they'd adopted just 2 weeks earlier. But first, we have to do the gratitude thing. The gratitude thing? Grace asked. Every Christmas, we say what we're most grateful for, Autumn explained seriously. It's a family tradition. Daddy started it when I was little. You're still little, Bennett pointed out with a grin. I'm 8 3/4, Autumn replied with dignity. That's practically grown up. Anyway, I'll go first. This year I'm grateful for Dr. Grace becoming my real mommy, and for Honey, and for our house, and for the fact that Daddy smiles all the time now instead of just when he thinks I'm looking. Grace felt tears prick her eyes at Autumn's innocent observation about Bennett's happiness. I'm grateful, Bennett said, his voice thick with emotion, for second chances, and for learning that the best things in life can't be bought or planned or controlled. I'm grateful for my daughter's wisdom, and for the woman who taught me that love is supposed to make you braver, not more afraid. Both Autumn and Bennett looked expectantly at Grace, who had to take a moment to compose herself. I'm grateful, she said finally, for asthma attacks on airplanes, and for little girls who believe in love at first sight, and for men who are brave enough to restructure their entire lives for the people they love. I'm grateful for family dinners and bedtime stories and the privilege of being trusted with your hearts. Group hug, Autumn declared, launching herself at Grace and Bennett simultaneously. As they held each other close, with Honey trying to squeeze into the middle of their embrace, Grace marveled at the completeness of this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a divorced workaholic who couldn't imagine trusting her heart to anyone again. Now she was surrounded by love so abundant it seemed to fill every corner of their home. Okay, now presents, Autumn said, wiggling out of the hug. Dr. Grace, you have to open this one first because I made it myself. The gift was a photo album filled with pictures from their first 2 months as a family. House hunting adventures, grocery shopping trips, Honey's adoption day, and dozens of candid moments that Autumn had apparently been documenting without Grace noticing. The last page is for our wedding pictures, Autumn explained, flipping to the back. And then after that, we can start a new album for when we have a baby. Grace nearly choked on her coffee. When we have a baby? Well, not right away, Autumn said pragmatically. But eventually. Families grow, right? And I think I'd be an excellent big sister. Bennett was trying very hard not to laugh at Grace's expression. We should probably get through the wedding before we start planning our next major life event, he suggested diplomatically. True, Autumn agreed. But just so you know, I've been thinking about names. If it's a girl, I like Luna or Sage. If it's a boy, maybe Gabriel or Phoenix. Those are beautiful names, Grace managed weakly, still processing the idea of expanding their family further. I have excellent taste, Autumn said modestly, then brightened. Oh, Daddy, give Dr. Grace her other present. The special one. Bennett reached behind the tree and pulled out a small velvet box that made Grace's breath catch in her throat. I know we've already decided to get married, he said nervously, but I realized I never properly proposed. And Autumn pointed out that you can't have a wedding without an engagement ring. Inside the box was the most beautiful ring Grace had ever seen, a simple solitaire diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the morning light and threw rainbows across their coffee table. The center stone is a diamond, Bennett explained as he slipped the ring onto Grace's finger, but the surrounding stones are birthstones. Autumn's sapphire for September, my emerald for May, and your garnet for January. So we're all together, always. Grace stared at the ring through tears, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the design. Do you like it? Autumn asked anxiously. We looked at like 50 different rings before we found this one. I love it, Grace whispered. It's perfect. You're both perfect. Does this mean you'll marry us?" Bennett asked with mock seriousness. "This means I'll marry you," Grace confirmed, laughing through her tears. "Both of you. Forever and always." As Bennett kissed her and Autumn cheered and Honey barked excitedly, Grace felt the final piece of her story click into place. This was what happily ever after looked like. Not a fairy tale ending, but a beautiful beginning filled with love, laughter, and the promise of all the ordinary miracles that make up a life shared with the people who matter most. "Merry Christmas, my loves," she whispered against Bennett's lips. "Merry Christmas, wife," he whispered back. "Merry Christmas, Mommy," Autumn said, and Grace's heart soared at the words she'd never thought she'd hear directed at her. Outside, fresh snow began to fall on their garden, covering the dormant herb beds and bare apple trees in pristine white. By spring, those trees would bloom with pink flowers, and Grace's medicinal herbs would push up through the warming soil, and their family would gather for their first Easter together in the home they'd chosen with such love and hope. But for now, on this perfect Christmas morning, they had everything they needed: each other, their health, their love, and the absolute certainty that whatever challenges life might bring, they would face them together. This story proves that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our worst fears. Love really did conquer everything: panic, prejudice, past hurt, and fear of vulnerability. What was your favorite moment in this incredible love story? Drop a comment below and smash that subscribe button, because stories like this remind us that fairy tale endings are possible in real life. Share this with someone who needs to believe in unexpected love. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.